The day my nephew reached into my sister's casket, gently unclasped the silver necklace from around her neck and slipped it into his pocket, the entire chapel erupted in horrified whispers. My former brother-in-law shouted that his own son had just dishonored the dead, and for one unbearable moment, I believed him. Then Ethan walked straight toward me, pressed a folded note into my trembling hand, and whispered, "Mom said only you could know the truth." The first sentence on that tiny piece of paper made my knees give way. My sister hadn't simply prepared for her funeral. She had prepared for what would happen after it. If this story touches your heart, I'd be grateful if you'd stay with me until the very end. Please, like this video if you believe family secrets always find their way into the light. Subscribe if emotional stories about love, betrayal, and hope speak to you. And before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Reading your comments reminds me that none of us has to carry our hardest moments alone. My name is Carol Moore, and by the time my sister Linda Hayes died, I was 64 years old and old enough to know that grief does not always arrive as tears. Sometimes grief arrives as guilt. Sometimes it walks into your kitchen at 2:17 in the morning, sits across from you in the dark, and reminds you of every phone call you did not return quickly enough. Every apology you swallowed, every warning sign you convinced yourself was only your imagination. Linda was 3 years older than me. Growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, she was the sister who always knew what to do. When I was 7 and afraid of thunderstorms, she would climb into my bed and tell me the sky was only moving furniture around. When I was 13 and some girl at school laughed at my secondhand coat, Linda marched right up to her the next day and said, "My sister wears what she wants, and you will keep your mouth shut." That was Linda. Soft voice, strong spine. At least that was the Linda I knew before David Hayes came into her life. David was handsome in the way men can be when they know exactly how to perform kindness in public. He opened doors, carried grocery bags for older women, quoted scripture at church dinners, and called my mother ma'am until she blushed. Everyone thought Linda had found a good man. I did too at first. He worked in commercial real estate, drove a polished black Lincoln, and always smelled faintly of expensive cologne and wintergreen mints. He had that smooth way of making you feel as if he had already decided what the truth was and your only job was to agree with him. When Linda married him, I stood beside her in a lavender bridesmaid dress and cried happy tears. I had no idea I was watching my sister walk into a cage with flowers on the door. The changes were small in the beginning. Linda stopped coming by without calling first. Then she stopped calling just to talk. When I asked her to meet for lunch, she would say David had already made plans. When I invited her over for Thanksgiving, she said David thought it would be better if they hosted. Then came the little comments. "David says I worry too much. David thinks I should let him handle the finances. David doesn't like it when I talk about private matters outside the marriage." Private matters. That was what he called everything. Money, arguments, her sadness, her loneliness, her fear. By the time their son Ethan was born, Linda had become quieter. Not cold, never cold, but careful. She chose her words like someone stepping across cracked ice. Ethan was the only light I saw in that house. From the time he was a baby, Linda held him like he was proof that some part of her life still belonged to her. I remember visiting when he was 4, watching him run across the living room with a toy fire truck, while Linda laughed in a way I had not heard in years. David looked up from his newspaper and said, "Linda, lower your voice." Just like that, the laughter disappeared. I should have said something stronger then. I should have stood up, taken my sister's hand, and told her to pack a bag. But families are complicated, especially when you are taught not to interfere in a marriage. People say it's none of your business until the damage becomes too large to ignore. Then they say, "Why didn't anyone help?" I tried in my own imperfect way. Over the years, I told Linda she could come to me anytime. I told her my spare room was always open. I told her she did not have to live under David's rules. But Linda always gave me the same tired smile. "It's not that simple, Carol." And maybe it wasn't. David had money. David had influence. David had friends at the bank, at the church, at the county offices. He knew how to make himself look reasonable and make everyone else look unstable, especially Linda. When Linda finally divorced him after nearly 30 years of marriage, I thought my sister had been set free. I was wrong. David moved out, but he never truly left. He called constantly. He stopped by to check on Ethan. He questioned repairs Linda made to the house. He criticized what she bought, where she went, who she spoke to. He acted as if divorce had only removed his wedding ring, not his sense of ownership. By then, Ethan was 17. Tall, quiet, thoughtful, with his mother's brown eyes and his father's guarded expression. But unlike David, Ethan's silence was not cruel. It was protective. He listened more than he spoke. He noticed things adults thought children missed. Linda and I had begun finding our way back to each other during those final 2 years. slowly, carefully, like two women walking through the ruins of a house we once shared. She would come over on Sunday afternoons, sometimes bringing lemon pound cake from a bakery near her house. We would drink tea at my kitchen table and talk about harmless things at first. Whether grocery prices, Ethan's college applications, the neighbor's dog that kept digging under her fence. But sometimes when the light shifted and the house grew quiet, I would catch her staring at nothing. "Linda?" I would ask, "Are you all right?" She would blink and smile too quickly. "I'm just tired." That became her favorite answer. Tired, not scared, not trapped, not threatened, just tired. Then, about 4 months before she died, something changed. She started calling me late at night, the first time I answered half asleep. "Linda." There was a pause on the line. I could hear her breathing. "Carol," she whispered. "Did I wake you?" "It's fine. What's wrong?" Another pause. Then she said, "Do you ever wonder how different life might have been if we had listened to each other sooner?" I sat up in bed. "What happened?" "Nothing," she said quickly. Too quickly. "I just wanted to hear your voice." Before I could ask more, she said she loved me and hung up. After that, the calls became more frequent. Sometimes she would talk for 10 minutes about ordinary things and then suddenly go silent. Other times she would ask strange questions. "Do you still have the same safe deposit box at Fifth Third? Do you remember Daddy's old pocket watch? If something happened to me, you'd look after Ethan, wouldn't you?" That last question chilled me. "Linda, why are you asking me that?" She laughed, but it sounded broken. "A mother worries, that's all." I did not believe her. One afternoon, I drove to her house without telling her first. She lived in a modest brick home in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, the same house she had fought to keep after the divorce. I found her standing on the porch with a cardigan wrapped tightly around her, though it was warm outside. When she saw me, her face changed. Relief came first, then fear. She glanced over her shoulder into the house. "Carol, you shouldn't have come without calling." The words hurt more than I expected. "I'm your sister." "I know." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. "I know you are." Before she could say more, David's car pulled into the driveway. I still remember the sound of his tires on the gravel. Slow, deliberate. He got out wearing a navy sport coat and that same public smile. "Carol," he said. "What a surprise." I looked at Linda. Her face had gone pale. That was the first time I truly understood that my sister was still afraid of him. David came up the walk as if he owned the ground beneath it. "Linda needs rest," he said. "Doctor's orders." I asked, "Since when are you in charge of her doctor's orders?" His smile tightened. "Since I'm the only one around here making sure she doesn't make foolish decisions." Linda whispered my name, not as a greeting, as a warning. I left that day because she begged me with her eyes to go, and I hated myself for it before I even reached my car. 2 weeks later, Linda called me again. This time her voice was shaking. "Carol, if anything happens..." Then I heard a sound in the background, a door closing, a man's voice low and sharp. Linda gasped. The line went dead. I called back immediately. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. That night I almost drove to her house. I had my keys in my hand, my coat over my arm, and every instinct in my body telling me to go. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Linda. "I'm fine. Please don't come. I'll explain soon." But she never did. 3 days later, Ethan called me from the hospital. His voice was flat in the way a young person's voice gets when the pain is too large to fit inside it. "Aunt Carol," he said. "Mom collapsed. Linda died before sunrise. The official explanation was complications from a sudden cardiac event." That was what the doctor said. That was what David repeated to everyone. That was what Brenda told people at church, shaking her head with practiced sorrow. But as I stood in my black dress outside the funeral home, watching David greet mourners like a grieving king receiving subjects, I kept hearing Linda's unfinished sentence. "If anything happens," and deep in my chest, beneath the grief, beneath the shock, beneath all the years of regret, something colder began to grow. Suspicion. Because my sister had been tired. She had been afraid, and on the last night I heard her voice, she had been trying to warn me. The funeral was held on a gray Saturday morning at a small Methodist church on the east side of Columbus, the kind of church Linda had always loved. Red brick walls, white steeple stained glass windows that turned even the dullest daylight into soft patches of blue and gold across the carpet. I arrived early because I could not bear the thought of walking in late and seeing my sister already surrounded by flower strangers and polite sorrow. The parking lot was still half empty when I pulled in. A cold wind moved across the pavement carrying the smell of wet leaves and winter grass. I sat in my car for a full minute with both hands on the steering wheel trying to breathe. Linda was inside. My sister, who once braided my hair on the back porch, My sister who used to hum while she washed dishes. My sister who had called me in the middle of the night and tried to tell me something before fear stole the words from her mouth. I looked at the church doors and whispered, "I'm sorry." I was not even sure which apology I meant. Sorry for the years we lost. Sorry for not pushing harder. Sorry for believing there would always be more time. Inside the chapel was quiet, except for the organist playing a slow hymn. The sound seemed to float above everyone instead of touching them. Pale roses lined the aisle. White lilies surrounded the casket. Their scent was so strong it made my stomach turn. Linda lay at the front in a soft blue dress I recognized immediately. She had worn it to Ethan's junior high graduation. I remembered standing beside her that day, watching him walk across the stage with a nervous smile while Linda clapped so hard her palms turned red. She had leaned toward me and whispered, "That boy is the best thing I ever did." Now that same dress rested against her still body, carefully arranged by funeral home hands, and around her neck was the silver necklace. I had seen that necklace many times over the years. It was simple, almost old-fashioned, with a small oval locket hanging at the end. Linda wore it tucked beneath sweaters, beneath blouses, sometimes even beneath her nightgown when I stayed over after her divorce. Once, years ago, I asked her why she never took it off. She smiled and said, "Some things are easier to keep close than explain." At the time, I thought she meant memories. Now, looking at it against the blue fabric of her dress, I felt a strange pressure in my chest. Something about that necklace seemed heavier than silver. "Carol." I turned. David Hayes stood behind me in a dark suit, his face carefully arranged into grief. His eyes were dry. His posture was perfect. He held a folded program in one hand as though he were hosting a business luncheon instead of burying the woman he had spent decades controlling. "David," I said. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm glad you came. Linda would have wanted peace today." Peace. That word in his mouth felt like dust. "I came for my sister," I replied. A flicker passed across his face, too quick for anyone else to notice. "Of course." Before he could say more, Brenda Hayes appeared at his side. She was David's older sister, though she had the sharp energy of someone who had spent her life correcting other people. Her silver hair was pinned into a stiff twist, and her black dress looked expensive enough to announce both mourning and superiority. "Carol," she said, touching my arm without warmth. "Such a difficult day for all of us. I wanted to pull away. For all of us." As if Linda's pain had been equally shared by the people who caused it. Brenda glanced toward the casket and sighed dramatically. "At least she looks peaceful now. Poor thing. She was so troubled these last few years." I looked at her. "Troubled?" Brenda's mouth softened into something that pretended to be sympathy. "You know how Linda could be. Nervous, suspicious, emotional. David did everything he could." There it was. Even at Linda's funeral, they were shaping the story. Linda had not been afraid. She had been unstable. Linda had not been controlled. She had been difficult. Linda had not been warning me. She had been confused. I felt my hands curl around the funeral program until the paper bent. Before I could answer, a young man entered through the side door. Ethan. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe grief had made him look older overnight. He wore a black suit that did not quite fit his shoulders, and his tie was slightly crooked. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed, but he did not cry. Not once. He walked down the side aisle and sat in the front pew on the opposite end from David and Brenda. That alone told me something. David watched him with a tight jaw. Brenda leaned toward a woman beside her and whispered. The woman glanced at Ethan, then quickly looked away. I knew what they were thinking. Cold boy, ungrateful son, too numb to mourn his mother properly. But I knew better than to judge grief by its volume. Some people fall apart loudly. Others turn to stone because it is the only way they can remain standing. I moved toward him, but before I reached the pew, Ethan lifted his eyes. He looked straight past me. At the casket. No. At the necklace. His gaze locked on that small oval locket with such intensity that I stopped walking. His face did not change. He did not blink, but his hands resting on his knees tightened until his knuckles whitened. Then he looked at the clock above the rear doors. Back to the necklace. Back to the clock. A cold thread of unease slid through me. During the visitation, people came and went in soft waves. Church ladies hugged me and said Linda had been kind. Former neighbors told stories about casseroles and PTA meetings. A woman from Linda's library group cried into a tissue and said she always asked about my arthritis. That was Linda. Even when her own world was collapsing, she remembered other people's pain. David stood near the guest book accepting condolences, like a man receiving awards. He lowered his head at the right moments. He touched people's shoulders. He said, "We're comforted, knowing she's at rest." We. As if he and Linda had still been one unit. as if the divorce papers had never existed, as if his car had not been in her driveway weeks before her death. Several times I saw him glance toward Ethan, not with grief, not concern. Warning. Ethan never looked back at him. He kept his eyes on the necklace. At one point I sat beside him and whispered, "Honey, have you eaten anything?" He shook his head. "Do you want me to get you water?" "No, thank you." His voice was low, rough from disuse. I reached for his hand, but he pulled it away, not rudely, not sharply, but like someone afraid touch might break him. Then he leaned closer, still staring forward. "Aunt Carol," he whispered, "when the prayer ends, don't leave." I turned to him. "What do you mean?" He swallowed. "Just don't leave the chapel." Before I could ask another question, David appeared at the end of the pew. "Ethan," he said softly, but there was steel under it. "Come greet your family." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They're not here for me." David's smile stayed in place, but his eyes hardened. "This is not the day for attitude." For the first time that morning, Ethan looked at his father. "No," he said, "it really isn't." The words were quiet, but something in them made David's face darken. Brenda quickly stepped in, placing one hand against David's sleeve. "Let the boys sit," she murmured. "People are watching. People are watching." That was the only language they respected. The service began at 11. The minister spoke gently about Linda's kindness, her devotion to her son, her quiet faith. He said she had carried burdens with grace. I stared at my hands and wondered if he knew how true that was. A hymn followed, then a prayer. The entire chapel bowed their heads. I did too, but I could not concentrate on the words. My mind kept replaying Ethan's whisper, "When the prayer ends, don't leave." Beside the casket, the candles flickered. The organ hummed softly under the minister's voice. Somewhere behind me, someone sniffled. Then I heard movement, not from the pews behind me, from the front. I opened my eyes. Ethan was standing. At first, I thought grief had finally overtaken him, that he was walking toward his mother for one final goodbye. He moved slowly, almost carefully, as if every step had been rehearsed and feared. The minister's voice faltered but did not stop. David lifted his head. Brenda stiffened. Ethan reached the casket and stood over Linda. For one long moment, he simply looked at her. His shoulders trembled once, and I saw the boy inside the young man, the child who had lost the only person who truly protected him. Then his hand moved, not to touch her cheek, not to place a flower. His fingers went to the clasp of the silver necklace. A gasp rose from the front row. I froze. Ethan gently lifted Linda's hair, found the clasp, and opened it with shaking hands. The necklace slipped free. The minister stopped speaking. The chapel went silent. Then Brenda's voice cut through the air. "What on earth are you doing?" Ethan closed his fist around the locket. David rose so quickly the pew creaked. "Put that back," he said. Ethan did not move. David stepped into the aisle, his face no longer arranged into grief. It was raw now, furious. I said, "Put it back." Whispers spread through the chapel like fire through dry grass. "He's taking her jewelry." At the funeral, that poor woman. I stood, my heart hammering. "Ethan," I said softly. He turned. His eyes found mine. And in that moment, I understood something no one else in that room did. He was not ashamed. He was terrified. But he was not ashamed. He held the necklace tightly in one hand and began walking toward me. David moved as if to stop him. Brenda hissed, "David, not here." Again, people were watching. Ethan reached my pew. His face was pale, but his voice was steady enough for only me to hear. "She told me only you would understand." Then he pressed the necklace into my palm, along with a small folded note. The paper was warm from his hand. Behind him, David stared at that note with a look I would never forget. Not confusion, not outrage, fear. For a few seconds, I could not move. The necklace lay in my palm like something alive. Cold silver, small oval locket, delicate chain twisted around my fingers. Beside it rested the folded note Ethan had pressed into my hand, no larger than a church bulletin corner, folded twice with careful, nervous creases. Around us, the chapel had become a room full of judgment. I heard whispers behind me. That poor woman's son took jewelry off her body, right in front of everyone. What kind of boy does that? Ethan heard them too. I saw it in the way his shoulders pulled inward, but he did not defend himself. He simply stood there, breathing hard, eyes fixed on me, as if the whole world could misunderstand him as long as I did not. David started down the aisle. "Give that to me, Carol." His voice was low enough not to seem like shouting, but sharp enough that the people closest to us turned their heads. I closed my fingers around the necklace. "Not until I know what's going on." David's face tightened. "What's going on is that my son just stole from his dead mother in front of an entire church." Ethan flinched at the word stole. I stepped slightly in front of him without thinking. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe some part of me finally realized Linda was not there to stand between her son and David anymore. "He didn't steal it," I said. Brenda appeared beside David, her black heels clicking softly against the chapel floor. "Carol, this is not the time for your usual dramatics." My usual dramatics. I almost laughed. For years, that family had called every uncomfortable truth dramatic, every boundary dramatic, every question dramatic. It was a neat little word they used to make cruelty sound like order. The minister stood frozen near the pulpit, still holding his prayer book. The funeral director hovered near the side wall, clearly unsure whether to intervene or pretend this was part of some private family ritual. David held out his hand. "The necklace belongs with Linda." Ethan's voice came quietly from behind me. "No, it doesn't." Everyone heard him. David slowly turned his eyes toward his son. "What did you say?" Ethan swallowed. His face had gone pale, but he lifted his chin. "She told me to take it." A fresh wave of whispers moved through the chapel. David gave a short, cold laugh. "Your mother was heavily medicated at the end. She said a lot of things that didn't make sense." I felt Ethan tense behind me. There it was again. The same story Brenda had begun telling before the service. Linda was confused. Linda was emotional. Linda could not be trusted. My sister had been buried in a blue dress for less than an hour, and already they were trying to bury her voice with her. I looked down at the note. My fingers shook. Part of me wanted to open it right there in front of everyone. Another part of me knew Linda would not have folded a secret into that little square of paper unless she had needed privacy. David saw my hesitation. His tone softened immediately. "Carol," he said, taking one step closer. "I know grief makes people act irrationally. Let's not make a scene. Hand me the necklace and the note and we'll discuss this later as a family." As a family. The words slid over me like oil. "You and I are not family, David." His eyes hardened. Brenda inhaled sharply. "How dare you say that at Linda's funeral?" I looked at her. "How dare you turn her funeral into a performance?" The chapel went silent again. For the first time that morning, David's polished mask cracked enough for everyone to glimpse what lived beneath it. Anger. Not grief. Not concern. Anger. He stepped closer. "That necklace is Hayes family property." "No," Ethan said. "It was Mom's." David pointed at him. "You need to sit down before you embarrass yourself any further." Ethan did not sit. His hands curled into fists at his sides. He was only 17, but in that moment he looked like someone who had been waiting years to say no. Brenda turned toward the gathered mourners, her face arranged in wounded dignity. "Please forgive this disturbance," she announced. "My nephew is clearly not himself." The words made Ethan's face change. Not anger this time. Pain. That was what nearly broke me, because I had seen the same expression on Linda's face too many times. I tucked the note into my coat pocket and held the necklace tight. Then I reached for Ethan's arm. "We're stepping out." David blocked the aisle. "No, you're not." The minister finally moved. "Mr. Hayes," he said gently, "perhaps the family should take a moment in the side room." David did not look at him. His eyes stayed on my pocket. That told me more than anything he had said. If this were truly about respect for Linda's body, he would have looked at the casket. If this were about Ethan's behavior, he would have looked at his son. But he looked at the note, at my pocket, at the place where Linda's final words were hidden. I met his stare and felt something inside me settle. For years I had backed away because Linda asked me to. Because I did not want to make things worse. Because David was good at making every confrontation feel like a trap. But Linda was gone now. And Ethan was still here. I said, "Move." David stared at me stunned, as if no woman in that room had ever used a voice that firm with him. Then, because people were watching, he stepped aside. I guided Ethan down the aisle. Every step felt too loud. The carpet seemed to swallow my shoes, but the silence around us made everything echo the rustle of coats, someone's breath catching Brenda whispering David's name behind us. We entered the small family room off the chapel, and I closed the door. The moment it clicked shut, Ethan folded forward like his bones had finally given out. I grabbed his shoulders. "Ethan, look at me." He shook his head. "I'm sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for." "I promised her I would do it," he whispered. "I promised even if everybody hated me." My throat tightened. Linda had made her child carry a burden no child should carry, but I knew my sister well enough to understand she must have had no other choice. I guided him to a small sofa against the wall. The room smelled of coffee-old hymnals and furniture polish. A tray of untouched cookies sat on a side table. Someone had placed a box of tissues beside a framed painting of Jesus holding a lamb. Outside the door, muffled voices rose and fell. "David. Brenda. Damage control." I sat beside Ethan and took the note from my pocket. "Did you read this?" He shook his head. She told me not to. She said it was for you. When did she give it to you? His eyes filled though no tears fell. 3 nights before she died. I felt the air leave my lungs. What exactly did she say? Ethan looked down at his hands. She said if something happened to her, I had to wait until after the prayer at the funeral. Not before, not at the hospital, not at the house. She said there would be too many chances for him to take it before then. Him, I repeated. Ethan's jaw tightened. My dad. I closed my eyes for a second. Linda, what were you living through? The folded note trembled between my fingers. I opened it carefully, afraid the paper might tear, afraid the words might vanish if I unfolded them too fast. The handwriting was Linda's. Small, slanted, familiar. I had seen that handwriting on birthday cards, grocery lists, recipe cards, Christmas tags, and letters from our childhood. Seeing it now felt like hearing her voice from the other side of a locked door. There were only 2 lines. Carol, if Ethan gives you this, don't trust David. Look inside the locket before he gets it. My hand went cold. Ethan watched my face. What does it say? I could barely speak. She says not to trust your father. He let out something that was almost a laugh but carried no humor. She finally wrote it down. I looked at the necklace. The locket was oval with tiny engraved vines around the edge. I had always assumed it opened like any ordinary keepsake, but now, as I turned it over in my palm, I saw something I had never noticed before. A seam. Not just the front opening. A second seam near the back so thin it looked like part of the design. My fingernail found the edge. It did not open. I tried again harder. Still nothing. Ethan leaned closer. Mom used a safety pin. I stared at him. You knew? She showed me once. She said if her hands ever got too weak, I needed to remember. His voice broke on the last word. I looked around the room and found a small sewing kit in a drawer beneath the coffee supplies. Inside was a needle thread and a silver safety pin. My hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to open the pin. I slid the point into the tiny seam and pressed. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then there was a soft click. The back of the locket opened. Inside was not a lock of hair, not a photograph, not anything sentimental. There was a tiny piece of folded paper and a small brass key no bigger than the tip of my thumb taped carefully into the hollow space behind the lining. Ethan covered his mouth. I pulled the paper free and unfolded it. On it, Linda had written a bank name, a box number, and 4 digits. 5th Third Bank. Safe Deposit Box 418. Code 0926. September 26th. Our mother's birthday. A sob rose in my chest so suddenly I had to press my hand against my mouth to hold it back. Linda had chosen a number only I would recognize. Not David, not Brenda, me. After all those years apart, after all the silence and distance and fear, my sister had still trusted me with the one thing she could not risk saying aloud. A knock struck the door, not gentle, demanding. David's voice came through the wood. Carol, open this door. Ethan went rigid. I closed the locket, slipped the key and paper into my purse, and stood. For the first time since Linda died, my grief was no longer helpless. It had become purpose. I looked at Ethan and said quietly, Your mother left us something to find. Then I turned toward the door. And David knows it. David knocked again. This time the sound was harder, sharper, the kind of knock that was not asking permission, but announcing ownership. Carol, he said from the other side of the door, open it now. Ethan sat stiffly on the small sofa, his eyes fixed on the door as if he expected it to burst off its hinges. I could see how deeply his father's voice lived inside him. It was not just sound, it was command, it was history. It was every dinner table silence, every slammed cabinet, every warning look Linda had tried to hide. I slipped the tiny brass key and the paper with the bank information deeper into my purse beneath my wallet and a packet of tissues. Then I closed the clasp. Stay behind me, I whispered. Ethan shook his head. He'll take it. No, I said. He won't. I sounded braver than I felt. When I opened the door, David was standing so close I nearly stepped into him. Brenda stood just behind his shoulder, her lips pressed into a thin line. The minister hovered several feet away, looking like a man who wished the floor would open and swallow him before he had to choose sides in a family war. David's eyes moved past my face down to my purse. Where is it? He asked. I kept my voice calm. Where is what the necklace? It's safe. His jaw tightened. That is not an answer. It is the only answer you're getting right now. Brenda stepped forward. Carol, you are embarrassing yourself. This is a house of God. I looked at her. Then maybe stop lying in it. Her face flushed. David raised one hand slightly, not enough to touch me, but enough to make Ethan stand up behind me. Don't, Ethan said. The word was quiet. David looked over my shoulder at his son. You've caused enough trouble today. No, Ethan said again. His voice shook, but he did not back down. Mom caused trouble for you by telling the truth. For one brief second, David's expression changed so completely that I felt my stomach drop. He knew. He did not know exactly what we had found yet, maybe, but he knew Linda had left something behind. He knew that necklace was not sentimental. He knew that note mattered, and because he knew he was afraid. But fear in men like David rarely looks like fear. It looks like anger. He turned toward the minister. Reverend, I'm sorry my son is unwell. He has been under tremendous strain. I think it would be best if Carol returned what does not belong to her and we continued with the service. The minister glanced at me, then at Ethan. Mrs. Moore, I heard the question beneath my name. Is this truly necessary? Was it worth disturbing a funeral? Would it be kinder to wait? That was how families like ours survived for years, by waiting for a better time to confront evil. A quieter time. A more appropriate time. A time when no one was watching. But that time never came. It only gave people like David more space to hide. I said, my sister left instructions. I intend to follow them. Brenda scoffed. Linda was not in her right mind. Ethan's face twisted. Stop saying that! Brenda turned on him. You are a child. I'm her son, and you just humiliated her memory. No, he said, and his eyes filled at last. You did. The hallway fell silent. Behind David and Brenda, a few mourners had gathered near the chapel doors. They pretended not to listen, but grief makes people curious and scandal makes them shameless. David noticed them too. His expression changed again, rearranging itself into sorrow. Ethan, he said softly, I know you're hurting. I know you want someone to blame. Ethan's hands trembled at his sides. David took a step toward him. Your mother was sick. She was confused. She got ideas in her head, you know that. Ethan looked at me then, and the look on his face nearly broke my heart. Because he was 17 and part of him still wanted a father. Even this father. Even now. I know what I heard, he whispered. David froze. That was the wrong sentence. I saw it land. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. What you heard, David said carefully, was your mother under stress. Ethan shook his head. No, I heard you. Brenda grabbed David's sleeve. Not here! Again those words. Not here. Not because it was false. Because it was public. I stepped back into the family room and reached for Ethan's coat from the chair. We're leaving. David blocked the hallway again. The service isn't over. For us it is. You cannot just walk out with Linda's property. I lifted my chin. Then call the police. His eyes narrowed. That was when I knew he would not. Not yet. Men who depend on shadows do not invite flashlights until they know what those flashlights will reveal. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, David stepped aside with a smile so cold it barely looked human. This is a mistake, Carol. Maybe I said. But it's mine to make. I guided Ethan through the side hall and out a rear door into the church parking lot. The cold air hit my face, and for the first time since walking into that chapel, I could breathe without smelling lilies. Ethan stopped beside my car. His composure cracked all at once. He bent forward, hands on his knees, and sobbed. Not loud, not dramatic, just a broken, breathless sound that seemed pulled from somewhere deeper than words. I put one hand on his back. I'm sorry, he choked out. I didn't want to do it like that. I know. Everyone thinks I'm horrible. No, honey. They think what David wants them to think. He wiped his face with his sleeve, suddenly looking much younger than 17. Mom said they would. I opened the passenger door. Get in. We're not talking here. We drove away from the church without going to the burial. That decision would haunt me later. I would think about Linda's casket being lowered into the ground while I was driving through Columbus streets, with her son beside me and her secret hidden in my purse. I would wonder if I had failed her by leaving before the final prayer. But then, I would remember the note. Look inside the locket before he gets it. Linda had not asked me to stand beside a grave. She had asked me to act. We drove to a small diner 15 minutes away, the kind with cracked red booths and waitresses who called everyone sweetheart. I chose a booth in the back where we could see the door. Ethan slid into the seat across from me and stared at the table. A waitress came over, took one look at our black clothes and swollen eyes, and softened her voice. Coffee. I nodded. 2, please. And water. When she left, I pulled the folded paper from my purse and laid it flat between us. Fifth Third Bank. Safe Deposit Box 418. Code 0926. Ethan stared at it. Do you know what's in the box, I asked? He shook his head. Mom wouldn't tell me. She said the less I knew, the safer I was. Safer. That word made my skin prickle. Did she ever mention a lawyer? Michael Turner. Ethan said immediately. She had me memorize his name. She said if something happened and you couldn't help, I should call him. Did she say why? He looked toward the window, watching cars move past under the gray sky. She said Dad wanted the house. The house. Ethan nodded. Mom said Grandpa left some money for it years ago before he died. It was supposed to be protected for me somehow. I didn't really understand. I did. Or at least I began to. Linda and David's divorce had been ugly, but Linda had kept the house. I remembered how proud she was of that. Not because it was grand, it was not, but because it was hers. A brick home with a little maple tree in front, a kitchen window over the sink, and Ethan's height marks penciled inside the pantry door. To David, it was property. To Linda, it was proof she had survived. "Did your father come by often?" I asked. Ethan gave me a look that said the question was too small. All the time. Even after the divorce. Especially after. He wrapped both hands around the glass of water the waitress had brought, though he did not drink. He'd say he needed to check on repairs or talk about insurance or help Mom with paperwork. Sometimes he would bring Aunt Brenda. They'd sit at the kitchen table and talk to her like she was a child. I felt my throat tighten. What kind of paperwork? I don't know. Forms, bank stuff, medical stuff. Once I heard Dad say if she didn't sign, she'd leave me with nothing. I closed my eyes. "Linda, why didn't you tell me?" But I already knew part of the answer. Shame, fear, isolation, and maybe the terrible hope that if she stayed quiet long enough, David would eventually stop. Ethan leaned closer. "There's something else." I opened my eyes. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out an old cell phone. It was small, scratched, and wrapped in a folded handkerchief. Mom gave me this with the note. My heart began to pound again. She said not to turn it on unless I was with you. I stared at the phone. Outside traffic moved as usual. Coffee poured. Plates clattered. Somewhere near the front counter, an older man laughed at something in the newspaper. The world kept behaving like an ordinary Saturday. But at that booth with Linda's handwriting between us and her hidden phone in her son's hand, I knew our lives had just crossed into something we could not uncross. "What's on it?" I asked. Ethan's mouth trembled. "Recordings," he said. "I think." The waitress returned with coffee. Neither of us touched it. I looked down at the tiny brass key in my palm. A key. A code, a secret phone. A dead sister who had planned for her own funeral like it was the only safe place left to pass along the truth. And a man who had nearly lost control in a church hallway because he knew something was slipping out of his hands. I closed my fingers around the key. "We go to the bank first," I said. Ethan looked scared. So was I. But fear was no longer enough to stop me. The bank was only 10 minutes from the diner, but the drive felt much longer. Ethan sat beside me with Linda's old phone gripped in both hands, still wrapped in the handkerchief like something fragile or dangerous. He did not speak. I did not either. There are moments when words only make fear louder, and the silence between us was already full. Rain had begun to mist against the windshield, not enough for the wipers to work steadily, just enough to blur the road ahead. I remember thinking how cruelly ordinary the world looked. Traffic lights changed. A woman walked a small dog under a red umbrella. A man in a pickup truck honked at someone who hesitated too long at a green light. My sister was dead. Her son had just been called a thief at her funeral. And somewhere in my purse was a key she had hidden inside a necklace because she had not trusted the people around her while she was alive. Yet, the world kept moving. That is one of the hardest things about grief. You expect the sky to split open. You expect strangers to stop and say, "Something terrible has happened here." But they do not. They buy coffee. They check their phones. They merge into traffic. They live inside a day that has not broken for them. When we pulled into the parking lot of Fifth Third Bank, Ethan finally spoke. "What if they won't let us open it?" I turned off the engine but kept my hands on the wheel. "Then we ask what we need to do legally. What if Dad already got there? He didn't have the key." Ethan looked down. He might have other papers. That possibility sat between us like a stone. David had spent years around Linda's finances. If he had pressured her to sign documents, if he had found a way to put his name where it did not belong, then a tiny brass key and a box number might not be enough. But Linda had not been careless, not with this. I looked at Ethan. "Your mother used my mother's birthday as the code. She hid the key where only you could get it to me. She planned the timing down to the end of the funeral prayer. She knew what she was doing." He nodded, but he still looked like a boy trying not to be one. Inside the bank was warm and quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made every footstep seem suspicious. A row of tellers worked behind glass. A few people waited in blue chairs near a coffee station. On the wall, a framed poster showed a smiling couple holding house keys. I almost laughed at that. Keys were beginning to feel like the difference between safety and ruin. A woman in a navy blazer approached us. Her name tag read, Emily Carter, branch manager. "Good afternoon," she said gently. "How can I help you?" I opened my purse and took out the folded paper, the brass key, and my driver's license. My sister passed away, I said, and even saying it in that sterile building made my throat tighten. She left me this information. We believe she has a safe deposit box here. Emily's professional expression softened. I'm very sorry for your loss. What was your sister's name, Linda Hayes? At the name, something flickered in Emily's eyes. Recognition. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. You're Carol Moore, she asked. I went still. Yes. Emily glanced at Ethan, then back at me. And this is Ethan. Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. Yes, I said slowly. How did you know? Emily lowered her voice. Mrs. Hayes came in several weeks ago. She added instructions to her file. My heart began to pound. What instructions? Emily looked toward the lobby, then gestured to a hallway. Why don't we step into my office? The office was small but neat with a round table, 2 chairs and family photos on the desk. Emily closed the door behind us, then sat across from me and opened her computer. I need to verify your identification first, she said, and I'll need to follow our procedures carefully. Of course. She scanned my license, asked me several questions, then requested Ethan's ID. He handed over his school identification and birth certificate copy from his wallet. I noticed his hands shaking. Emily worked quietly for several minutes. I watched her face. At my age, you learn to read people not by what they say, but by what they try not to show. Emily Carter was trying very hard to remain professional, but beneath that I saw concern. Finally, she turned the monitor slightly away and folded her hands. Mrs. Moore, she said your sister did rent a safe deposit box at this branch. Box 418. She added you as an authorized deputy less than a month ago. Authorized deputy. Linda had found a legal way. My breath left me in a rush. She added me. Yes. She came in person. She was very clear. Ethan's eyes filled again, but he blinked fast. Emily continued. She also left a sealed instruction card stating that if you arrived with Ethan Hayes and the key, you were to be given access. I looked at the brass key on the table. For the first time that day, I felt Linda close, not as a memory, as a presence. Was she alone when she came in? I asked. Emily hesitated. That hesitation told me the answer mattered. The first time, no, she said. A man was with her. David Hayes. Emily's lips pressed together. I can't disclose details beyond what's permitted, but I can say Mrs. Hayes returned alone 2 days later and made changes to her box access. Ethan leaned forward. Was she scared? Emily looked at him, and her professional distance softened into something human. She seemed very determined. That was Linda, too. Scared, maybe, but determined. Emily stood. I'll take you to the vault room. My legs felt unsteady as we followed her down the hallway. The vault door was thick and gray with polished metal that reflected our distorted faces as we approached. Emily used her key first, then nodded for me to use Linda's. The tiny brass key slid into the lock. For one terrible second, I imagined it would not turn. Then it did. The box slid out with a dull metallic scrape. Emily carried it to a private viewing room and set it on the table. I'll give you privacy, she said. Press the call button if you need anything. When the door closed, Ethan and I stared at the box. Neither of us touched it at first. It was not large, maybe the size of a shoebox, long and narrow, but it seemed to hold the weight of every unanswered question Linda had left behind. I placed both hands on the lid. Are you ready? I asked. Ethan swallowed. No, me neither. Then I opened it. Inside was a stack of folders tied with a blue ribbon, a sealed envelope with my name on it. Another envelope marked, for Ethan, a small flash drive, several photocopied documents, and a packet of bank statements clipped together. On top of everything was a handwritten note. Carol, start with the red folder. Then call Michael Turner. Do not go back to the house alone. My skin went cold. Do not go back to the house alone. Ethan read it over my shoulder. His voice dropped. She knew. I untied the ribbon with fingers that felt numb. The red folder was labeled Property and Trust Documents. Inside were copies of deeds, trust papers, insurance forms, and legal correspondence. I did not understand all of it, but certain words leapt out at me. Revocable trust. Beneficiary Ethan Hayes. Successor trustee Carol Moore. Power of attorney revoked. Revoked. My eyes stopped on that word. A document dated 6 weeks before Linda's death stated that any prior financial authority granted to David Hayes was canceled immediately. I looked at Ethan. Your mother revoked his access. Ethan's face tightened. Then why was he still coming over with papers? A terrible answer formed in my mind. Because maybe he didn't accept that. I opened the next folder. Medical and insurance. There were photocopies of prescriptions, doctor visit summaries, a life insurance policy. A letter Linda had written but apparently never mailed, addressed to Detective Sarah Brooks at the Columbus Police Department. Detective. I felt the room tilt. Ethan saw my face. What I unfolded the letter. Dear Detective Brooks, if this reaches you, it means I was either unable or too afraid to make the report in person. I believe my former husband, David Hayes, and his sister, Brenda Hayes, are attempting to pressure me into signing over property and financial control intended for my son, Ethan. The words blurred. I pressed a hand to the table. Linda had tried to tell someone. Maybe she had not finished. Maybe fear stopped her. Maybe David had. Ethan reached for the letter, but I held it gently. There's more, I said. The bank statements were next. At first, they looked ordinary. Transfers, withdrawals, account numbers. But several pages had yellow sticky notes in Linda's handwriting. Not mine. I did not authorize this. Ask Michael. David said this was for taxes. One withdrawal made my stomach clench. $18,000. Then another. $12,500. Then a cashier's check made out to a company I did not recognize. Ethan stared at the numbers. We didn't have that kind of money, he whispered. Maybe you did, I said. And someone made sure you didn't know. At the bottom of the box was a small envelope marked Carol read alone if possible. I looked at Ethan. He understood and stood. I'll wait outside. No, I said immediately. You don't have to leave. He gave me a sad smile. Mom wrote your name on it. I think she wanted you to have one thing before I did. Then he stepped into the hallway, closing the door quietly behind him. I sat alone with my sister's final envelope. For several seconds, I could only stare at my name in her handwriting. Carol. Not Mrs. Moore, not my full name, just Carol. The way she used to write it on notes she slipped under my bedroom door when we were girls. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet. My dearest Carol, if you are reading this, then Ethan was brave enough to do what I asked, and you were brave enough to listen. I am sorry. I am sorry for the years I let David stand between us. I am sorry I made you feel unwanted when what I truly felt was ashamed. You saw what he was before I could admit it. That made it harder to face you, not easier. Please believe me when I say I never stopped loving you. My vision blurred. I covered my mouth, but the sob came anyway. Linda continued. David wants the house because it is not only mine. Daddy helped me secure it years ago in a way that protects Ethan. David knows enough to be dangerous, but not enough to win unless I disappear quietly and everyone believes I was confused. If anything happens to me, protect Ethan first. The truth is, in the documents, the phone, and the drive, Michael Turner knows part of it. You will have to help him find the rest. I folded over the page, unable to breathe. Unless I disappear quietly. That was what David had counted on. A quiet death. A grieving son discredited. A sister too stunned to fight. A funeral where he could stand in a suit and collect sympathy while Linda's warning stayed hidden around her neck. But Ethan had taken the necklace, and Linda had chosen the one moment David could not stop him without exposing himself. I wiped my face, put the letter back into the envelope, and opened the door. Ethan stood in the hall staring at the floor. When he looked up, I saw Linda in him so clearly it hurt. What now, he asked. I held the red folder against my chest. Now we call Michael Turner. And my dad? I looked back at the safe deposit box at the papers, at the proof my sister had gathered piece by trembling piece. Your father doesn't know it yet, I said. But your mother just spoke louder from that box than he ever let her speak in life. We did not call Michael Turner from the bank. That would have been the sensible thing to do, and maybe if grief had not been pressing against my ribs like a fist, I would have been sensible. But I had just spent an hour inside my sister's fear. I had read her handwriting. I had seen the folders, the bank statements, the word revoked the letter she had meant for a detective. And Ethan was sitting beside me, 17 years old, carrying more truth than any boy should have to carry. So instead of calling the lawyer immediately, I asked Emily Carter if we could make copies of the most urgent papers. She agreed carefully, reminding me that the originals should remain safe until we had legal guidance. I listened to her, but my hands moved as if Linda herself were guiding them. The red folder, the letter to Detective Brooks, the document revoking David's financial authority, the trust page naming Ethan as beneficiary and me as successor trustee, the bank statements with Linda's notes. Each page slid through the copier with a soft mechanical hum. Proof. That was what the sound meant to me. Proof that Linda had not been confused. Proof that David had a reason to be afraid. Proof that Ethan had not dishonored his mother. He had obeyed her. When we left the bank, the sky had darkened. The mist had turned into steady rain, tapping against the windshield like impatient fingers. Ethan held the copied folder in his lap. What happens if Dad finds out he asked? He already knows something is wrong. He'll come after you. I glanced at him. Then he'll find me standing upright. That almost made Ethan smile. Almost. We were less than 5 minutes from the bank when my phone rang. David Hayes. His name on the screen made the car feel smaller. Ethan saw it and went rigid. "Don't answer." I let it ring. The call ended. Then it rang again. And again. By the fourth call, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot parked under a bare branch tree and stared at the screen until it stopped. A text appeared. "Carol, this has gone far enough. Return the necklace and whatever Ethan gave you. You are interfering in family property and causing emotional harm to a minor." I read it twice. Causing emotional harm. That man had stood in a church and called his son unstable. He had spent years making Linda afraid in her own home. Yet now, with lawyerly language and polished threats, he was trying to dress himself as protector. Another text arrived. "If you do not return my late ex-wife's belongings today, I will file a police report for theft." Ethan whispered. "He can do that. He can try." But I took it from Mom. "Because she instructed you to. Will they believe me?" The question came so softly it barely reached me. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. His face was pale and exhausted, his eyes red from holding back too much. He was at that terrible age between boy and man, old enough to understand betrayal, too young to carry it without wounds. "I believe you," I said. His mouth trembled. "And your mother believed you," I added. "That is why she trusted you with the necklace." He looked down at his hands. "She said he'd make me look crazy." My stomach tightened. "When?" "A few weeks ago." Ethan rubbed his thumb over the edge of the folder. She was sitting on the floor of her bedroom. Papers everywhere. She looked so tired. I told her to call the police. She said if she moved too fast, Dad would say she was confused and Aunt Brenda would back him up. "And you?" He swallowed. "She said he'd say I was angry, grieving, dramatic. She said he'd use my age against me." Linda had known every move David would make, because she had lived inside his pattern for decades. My phone rang again. This time I answered and put it on speaker. "Carol," David said immediately. "Where is my son?" Ethan flinched. I kept my voice level. "He is safe. That is not what I asked. It is the only answer you need." David exhaled sharply. I could hear voices in the background, maybe Brenda's, maybe others from the funeral luncheon. "You walked out of my ex-wife's funeral with my minor child and property taken from Linda's body. Do you understand how serious that looks?" I stared through the rain-streaked windshield. "No, David. I understand how desperate you are to make it look serious." Silence. Then his voice lowered. "Be careful." There it was. Not grief. Not concern. A warning. I said, "Is there something in the necklace you're worried about?" The silence that followed was worth more than any confession. Then David gave a short laugh. "You always did have an imagination. And Linda always did know more than you thought." Ethan looked at me, eyes wide. David's tone sharpened. "Put Ethan on the phone." "No. I am his father. And Linda was his mother. Linda is dead." The words hit the car like a slap. Ethan turned his face toward the window. I felt something in me harden. "Yes," I said quietly. "And you seem very eager to benefit from that." David's breathing changed. "You have no idea what you're involving yourself in." "I think I'm starting to." "You think a grieving woman's ramblings and a confused boy's stunt at a funeral mean something? You have always resented me, Carol. Everyone knows that. If you try to turn my son against me, I will take this to court." Court! There it was. The next weapon. I thought of the trust documents, the revoked authority, Linda's notes on the bank statements. "Then I suggest you choose your words carefully," I said. David's voice turned cold. "Return the necklace." "No. That necklace belongs to the Hayes family. It belonged to Linda. She was a Hayes. She divorced you." Another silence. That one was not fear. That one was rage. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet enough to be dangerous. "You bitter old women never know when to stop." Ethan's head snapped toward the phone. I looked at him and shook my head once. "Do not answer." David continued. "Linda filled your head with nonsense because she couldn't accept that I was the only person trying to keep things together. She was unstable, Carol. You know it. I know it. Ethan knows it too, whether he admits it or not." Ethan reached for the phone, but I pulled it closer. "You don't get to rewrite her life 5 hours after burying her." "I don't need to rewrite anything. I have people who saw what happened today. My son removed jewelry from a corpse. You took him from a funeral. You are withholding property. That is what people saw." My pulse pounded in my ears. He was right about one thing. People had seen what happened, but people had not seen why. David knew how to use appearances. He had built a life out of them. A respectful suit, a soft voice, a grieving expression, a church full of witnesses who only saw the final act and not the years of pressure behind it. I looked at the folder on Ethan's lap. But Linda had built something too. A trail. I said, "Then maybe people should see what Linda left behind." David did not answer. For one moment I could hear only rain. Then he said, "What did you find?" Not, "What are you talking about?" Not, "What do you mean?" "What did you find?" Ethan heard it too. His lips parted. I felt the shift in the air. David had made a mistake. I let the silence stretch just long enough for him to understand it. Then I said goodbye. "David." I ended the call. For several seconds, neither Ethan nor I moved. Then Ethan whispered, he knew there was something. Yes, he knew Mom hid proof. Maybe not where, maybe not how much, but yes. Ethan closed his eyes. That's why he wanted the necklace. I nodded slowly. He didn't care about the necklace. He cared about what it opened. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail. Then another text. "You are making a mistake that will hurt Ethan most." I turned the phone face down. "We need to call Michael Turner now," I said. Ethan nodded. But before I could dial Ethan's old phone, the one Linda had given him vibrated in his hand. We both stared at it. The screen lit up. One missed alarm. Not a call, not a message. An alarm Linda had set before she died. The label read, "If Carol has the box play, recording 3 first." Ethan's face drained of color. She set alarms I could barely breathe. Linda had not just left documents. She had left instructions timed beyond her death. Ethan unlocked the phone with a passcode he knew by heart. His mother's birthday. Then he opened the recordings folder. There were 11 audio files. Recording 1, recording 2, recording 3. All dated within the last 2 months. His thumb hovered over the screen. "Are you sure?" he asked. No. I was not sure of anything anymore, but Linda had told us where to begin. "Play it," I said. Ethan tapped the file. At first there was only static. Then the faint sound of a kitchen chair scraping the floor. Then Linda's voice, thin, tired, but clear. "David, I told you I'm not signing anything else." A man's voice answered. "David, you'll sign if you care about Ethan." Ethan covered his mouth with one hand. Linda's voice shook. "The trust is for him." David laughed softly. "No, Linda, the trust is a problem, and problems can be fixed." The recording continued, but for a moment I could not hear over the blood rushing in my ears. Because there it was. Not suspicion. Not a grieving sister's imagination. David's own voice. Threatening Linda over the very papers he had claimed did not matter. Ethan turned the volume down, tears sliding silently down his face. I reached across the console and took his hand. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside that parked car, my dead sister finally spoke. And this time, David could not interrupt her. We listened to recording 3 twice before either of us spoke. The first time, I barely heard it through the shock. The second time, I listened like my sister's life depended on every word, even though it was already too late to save her. Linda's voice came through the little speaker faintly, as if she were standing in another room with the door almost closed. "David, I told you I'm not signing anything else." Then David's voice smooth and low. "You'll sign if you care about Ethan." The kitchen chair scraped. I heard paper sliding across a table. Linda said, "The trust is for him." David gave that soft laugh again, the one I remembered from years ago when he thought someone had said something foolish. "No, Linda. The trust is a problem, and problems can be fixed." Ethan sat frozen beside me, one hand covering his mouth, tears running over his fingers. The recording continued. Linda's voice trembled. "You have no right to threaten me." "I'm not threatening you," David said. "I'm explaining consequences. There's a difference. You can't take Ethan from me. I won't have to. If this goes to court, I'll show them the way you've been acting. Paranoid, forgetful, emotional. You think people haven't noticed?" There was a long pause. Then Linda whispered, "I know what you and Brenda are doing." David's tone changed. "What did you say I know about the withdrawals?" Another silence. Then a sharp sound like a palm striking the table. The recording ended. Ethan made a sound so small it hurt worse than a scream. I reached for him, but he pulled back and leaned against the passenger door, pressing his forehead to the cold window. I heard that night he whispered, "You were there in the hallway." His voice was barely steady. "Mom told me to stay upstairs, but I knew Dad was coming over." I sat on the stairs and listened. I looked at the phone in his lap. "Did she know?" He nodded. "After he left, she came up and found me crying. She didn't get mad. She just sat beside me and said, 'Now you understand why silence can be dangerous.'" My sister had been teaching her son how to survive the truth. I took a breath and picked up my own phone. This time I called Michael Turner. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice cautious and tired. "Michael Turner." "Mr. Turner, my name is Carol Moore. I'm Linda Hayes' sister." There was an immediate silence. Then he said, "Mrs. Moore, I've been expecting your call." The words sent a chill through me. Linda told you I might call yes, though I had hoped it would be under different circumstances. His voice softened. I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you, I said, though the words felt too small for the moment. I have Ethan with me. Good. Is he safe? I glanced at Ethan. For now. For now is not enough, Michael said. Where are you? I hesitated. He seemed to hear it. You're right to be careful, he said. Do not tell me if you are not comfortable. But listen to me closely. Do not return to Linda's house alone. Do not give David Hayes any documents. Do not meet him privately. And if he contacts either of you with threats, save everything. My grip tightened around the phone. We opened the safe deposit box. Another pause. You found it then? Yes. The red folder, the trust papers, the bank statements, her letter to Detective Brooks, the recordings. Michael exhaled heavily. Linda was afraid she would run out of time. Those words nearly undid me. She knew something might happen to her. She feared David would make a move before Ethan turned 18. I looked at Ethan, who was staring down at the old phone. Why 18? Because once Ethan turns 18, certain protections in the trust become harder for David to challenge. Linda's father helped establish the original structure years ago. David tried for a long time to access or dissolve it, but Linda resisted. Recently, she believed he had become more aggressive. She wrote that he wanted the house. He does, Michael said. But not only the house. The house sits inside a protected trust linked to other assets. Not enormous wealth, but enough to matter. Enough to pay for Ethan's college. Enough to give him a start. David has debts, Mrs. Moore. More than he admits. Debts. That one word pulled several threads together at once. The withdrawals. The pressure. The sudden urgency. The way David had looked at my purse in the church hallway. What kind of debts, I asked. I can't prove all of it yet, Michael said. But Linda believed he had borrowed heavily against failed real estate deals. She found statements, notices, collection letters. Where? At the house, he said. Or at least they were there when she called me. A fresh wave of dread moved through me. David may already have changed the locks. He can't legally prevent Ethan from accessing his mother's home without proper authority, Michael said. But David has never relied solely on legality. That was the cleanest description of him I had ever heard. What should we do now? Bring Ethan and the copies to my office. I'll meet you there. Today? Yes, immediately. It's Saturday. I know what day it is. The firmness in his voice steadied me. Then he added, Carol, listen carefully. The documents in that box may protect Ethan financially. The recordings may show coercion. But if Linda's original signed will and trust amendments are missing from her house, David may try to claim the copies are incomplete, outdated, or created under confusion. My stomach dropped. You think he'll challenge them? I think he already planned to. I closed my eyes. That was why he had acted so quickly at the funeral. He did not know how much Linda had secured, but he knew enough to fear the necklace, the box, and me. Michael continued. There is a sealed packet Linda was supposed to deliver to me the day after she collapsed. She never made it. What packet? The original signed documents. Her final statement. Possibly additional evidence. I opened my eyes. Where would she keep something like that? She mentioned a hiding place at the house, but she didn't tell me where. She said Ethan would know if the time came. I turned to Ethan. He had heard enough from my side of the conversation to understand. His eyes widened. The music box, he whispered. What? He sat up straighter. Mom's old music box. The one from Grandma. She kept it in her bedroom closet. She told me once that if I ever needed to remember where the truth was, I should listen for the song that didn't play. I repeated that to Michael. The song that didn't play, he said quietly. That sounds like Linda. For one painful second, I almost smiled. Yes, it did. Linda had always loved riddles when we were girls. She used to hide birthday gifts and leave clues around the house. The blue cup, the broken clock, the book with the torn cover. I had forgotten that part of her after so many years of seeing only the fear David left behind. But Linda had not disappeared completely. She had hidden the truth in the language of who she had been before him. Michael said, do not go there alone. Come to my office first. We'll decide the next step. I promised we would and ended the call. For a moment, Ethan and I sat in the rain-muted silence of the parked car. Then he said, we have to get it before Dad does. I know. He probably went there after the funeral. I know. His voice rose with panic. Then we can't go to the lawyer first. Ethan, if the packet is there and he finds it, it's gone. You heard Mr. Turner? He needs the originals. I hated that he was right. Every responsible instinct told me to go to Michael's office. Every protective instinct told me not to take Ethan anywhere near that house. But every sisterly instinct the one that had failed Linda too many times, screamed that David was already moving. I looked at the folder of copies. Copies could be challenged. Originals could speak louder. Is there any chance David knows about the music box, I asked? Ethan thought for a moment. I don't think so. He hated it. Said the song was annoying. Mom stopped playing it when he was around. What song, Edelweiss? My breath caught. Our mother used to sing that to us. Linda had not just chosen a hiding place. She had chosen a memory David would never understand. I started the car. Ethan looked at me. Where are we going to your mother's house? His face showed fear, relief, and dread all at once. But we need help. We're going to call the police if David is there. We're not confronting him. We're not going inside if it looks unsafe. But we are going to see whether the house is already compromised. I pulled out of the parking lot and merged into traffic. The rain fell harder now, turning the streets silver and gray. My phone buzzed again, but I ignored it. I knew it was David. More threats, more accusations, more attempts to pull us into his version of reality. But I had Linda's version now. In folders, in recordings, in handwriting, in a locket, and perhaps in an old music box waiting in a closet holding the one packet that could stop David from burying the truth with her. As we drove toward Linda's house, Ethan turned the old phone over in his hands. There are 10 more recordings, he said. I kept my eyes on the road. Then we'll listen to all of them. What if they get worse? I thought of Linda's voice on recording 3. Tired, but clear. Afraid, but refusing. They probably will, I said. Ethan looked out at the rain. Then he whispered, She was braver than I knew. I swallowed the ache in my throat. Yes, I said. She was. And silently, I made my sister a promise. This time, Linda, I will not leave before you finish speaking. Linda's house sat at the end of a quiet street, lined with maple trees, modest ranch homes, and porch flags damp from the rain. I had been there many times before, but that afternoon it looked different. Smaller somehow, more vulnerable. The porch light was still on, even though it was barely 3 in the afternoon, glowing weakly against the gray weather. A pot of dead mums sat beside the front steps. Linda had always loved mums in the fall. She used to say they made a house look like someone was waiting inside with soup on the stove. No one was waiting now. At least no one who belonged there. I slowed the car before turning into the driveway. Ethan leaned forward. His car isn't here. There was relief in his voice, but not enough of it. David's black Lincoln was not in the driveway. No unfamiliar car sat at the curb. The curtains were still. The front door was closed. But something was wrong. I saw it before Ethan did. The lock. A new shiny brass deadbolt had been installed above the old one. The color was brighter than the weathered handle beneath it. Fresh scratches marked the paint around the doorframe. Ethan's face changed. He changed it. I parked but did not turn off the engine right away. He moved fast, I said. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Mom hasn't even been buried for a full day. That was the part that made my stomach twist. David had not waited for grief, for courtesy, for decency. While people were still hugging each other in the church parking lot, he had already begun taking control of Linda's home, or trying to. We call Michael first, I said. Ethan shook his head. The music box is inside, and David may have set us up to look like we're breaking in. That stopped him. I dialed Michael Turner and put him on speaker. We're at the house, I said before he could scold me. He sighed. Carol. I know. But David changed the lock. Michael was silent for half a second. Are you outside? Yes. Do not force entry. We won't. Is Ethan with you? Yes. Good. Ethan has a legal interest in the residence, but we need to handle this carefully. Call the non-emergency police line and request an officer standby. Tell them there is a dispute over access to a deceased parent's home and that a minor heir needs to retrieve personal belongings. Ethan whispered. Will they come? Michael answered before I could. They should. And if David arrives, do not engage. What about the documents inside? I asked. I'm on my way, Michael said. Text me the address again. I'll bring copies of what Linda filed with my office, and until then, stay in the car. We ended the call. I did as he instructed. I called the police, explained the situation as calmly as I could, and gave them the address. The dispatcher said an officer would be sent when available. When available. That phrase felt too loose for the fear sitting in my chest. Ethan stared at the house. I hate that it looks normal, he said. I followed his gaze. The white curtains in the kitchen window. The little ceramic bird bath near the walkway. The mailbox Linda had painted blue one summer because she said every street needed a surprise. It was normal sometimes, he added quietly, when Dad wasn't there. I looked at him. He kept watching the house. Mom would make pancakes for dinner. She said breakfast food tasted better after sunset. We'd sit on the couch and watch old game shows. She always guessed the prices wrong, but acted offended when contestants did too. A small smile came and went on his face. She laughed more when he wasn't around. I knew that kind of sentence. Simple on the outside, devastating underneath. Did she talk much about the house, I asked? All the time. She said it was mine someday, but not because of money. She said every kid deserved one place where nobody could throw them out. My throat tightened. Linda had been building safety for Ethan while losing her own. Dad hated that, Ethan said. He said Mom filled my head with ownership instead of gratitude. Gratitude to whom? To him. I almost laughed from sheer disbelief, but the laugh died when Ethan continued. After the divorce, he kept saying he had sacrificed for us. He said the house should have been sold and split. Mom said Grandpa's money protected it. Dad said dead men don't get to make rules. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. That sounded exactly like David. Charming in public, cruel in private. Ethan reached into the folder and pulled out Linda's letter to Detective Brooks. He unfolded it carefully like he was afraid of hurting the paper. She wrote about the house here, he said. I nodded. Read it. He hesitated. It's all right, I said. Your mother wanted us to know. His voice shook at first, then steadied. She wrote, David has repeatedly demanded that I sign a quitclaim deed or authorize sale discussions regarding the property. I have refused. The home was placed under protection with my father's assistance before his death and is intended to benefit Ethan. David has told me that if I do not cooperate, he will make sure I am declared incapable of managing my affairs. Ethan stopped. Rain tapped harder on the car roof. Declared incapable. There it was in Linda's own words. Not merely pressure. A plan. Keep going, I said softly. Ethan swallowed. His sister Brenda has begun telling friends and church members that I am forgetful and emotionally unstable. I believe they are preparing people to doubt me. I have also noticed medication bottles moved from where I keep them, and on 2 occasions I felt unusually drowsy after Brenda brought me tea. The car seemed to close around us. Ethan lowered the paper. What does that mean? I knew what it sounded like. But saying it aloud felt like opening a door I could never close. It means Linda suspected Brenda may have been tampering with something. His face drained of color. With her medicine, maybe. Or maybe Linda only feared it. We don't know yet. But even as I said it, I remembered Brenda at the funeral. Poor thing. She was so troubled these last few years. She had not sounded like a grieving sister-in-law. She had sounded like a woman laying groundwork. Ethan continued reading, but his voice had gone flat. I have not been able to prove this. I have saved prescription records and photographs of bottle labels. I am afraid to confront them directly because David has warned me that no one will believe a frightened woman with a history of anxiety. I closed my eyes. Linda had always been nervous after David. That was true. But people like David could turn the wound they caused into proof against the person bleeding. Anxiety became instability. Fear became paranoia. Self-protection became evidence of confusion. Ethan folded the letter again with trembling hands. She thought they were poisoning her. I looked toward the house. I think she thought they were trying to weaken her. He stared at the blue mailbox. The night before she collapsed, Aunt Brenda was there. A cold pulse moved through me. What? I came home from school and saw her car. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table. Brenda had a mug in front of her. Mom looked not right. What do you mean, sleepy? Slow, like she was trying to focus but couldn't. He rubbed his forehead. I asked if she was okay. Brenda said, Your mother is just having one of her spells. Spells. Such an old-fashioned dismissive word. What did Linda say? She said she was fine. But when Brenda went into the bathroom, Mom grabbed my wrist and whispered, Don't drink anything she gives you. The air left my lungs. Ethan's eyes filled. I thought she meant Aunt Brenda was being annoying. I didn't understand. You were a child in a terrible situation. I was 17. That is still a child when adults are hiding danger around you. He looked at the house again, and this time there was anger under the grief. We need that music box. Before I could answer, a police cruiser turned onto the street. Relief and fear arrived together. The cruiser parked behind us. A female officer stepped out, putting on her hat against the rain. She looked to be in her 40s, calm, observant, with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many family disputes turn ugly. I got out slowly, holding my umbrella with one hand and the folder with the other. Mrs. Moore, she asked. Yes, I'm Officer Daniels. Dispatch said you requested a civil standby. Yes, this is my nephew Ethan Hayes. His mother Linda Hayes passed away this morning. This is her home. We believe the locks were changed without proper authority and Ethan needs to retrieve personal items. Ethan stepped out beside me looking both hopeful and terrified. Officer Daniels looked at him gently. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, he whispered. She examined the door from the walkway. Do you have proof of residence or relationship? Ethan pulled his wallet out and showed his school ID with the address printed on an emergency contact card. I showed Linda's obituary program, my ID, and copies from the trust folder. Officer Daniels did not rush. She read just enough to understand this was not a simple argument over keepsakes. Who changed the locks, she asked. His father, David Hayes, I said, Linda's ex-husband. Does he live here? No, Ethan said quickly. He hasn't lived here since the divorce. Officer Daniels looked toward the door. Do you have an old key? Ethan nodded and took it out. It still fit the lower lock, but the new deadbolt held the door shut. The officer's expression hardened slightly. Did Mr. Hayes notify you before changing this? No, Ethan said. Officer Daniels took out her radio and spoke quietly. That was when a black Lincoln turned onto the street. Ethan went still. My heart dropped. David pulled up behind the police cruiser as if he had been summoned by the house itself. Brenda sat in the passenger seat. Of course she was with him. David stepped out holding a folder of his own, his face carefully wounded. Officer, he called, walking toward us. Thank God you're here. This woman has been manipulating my son all day. Officer Daniels turned calmly. Sir, stay where you are for a moment. David stopped. Not because he respected the request, because there was a uniform attached to it. Brenda got out slowly, pulling her coat tight against the rain. Her eyes landed on the folder in my hands, then on Ethan, then on the house. For the first time, I saw panic break through her composure. Only for a second. But I saw it. And I knew. Whatever was inside that music box, Brenda was afraid of it too. David did not look surprised to see the police. That bothered me more than if he had looked angry. He stepped onto the wet pavement with his folder tucked under one arm, his black coat buttoned neatly, his expression fixed in that careful mixture of concern and injury he wore whenever there was an audience. Brenda came around the passenger side more slowly. Her umbrella snapped open with a sharp click. She glanced once at Officer Daniels, then at me, then at Ethan. When her eyes landed on the house, something tightened in her face. The music box, I thought. She knows there is something inside. Officer Daniels lifted one hand. Sir, I need you to remain near your vehicle until I understand the situation. David gave her a respectful nod. Of course, officer. I appreciate you being here. This has been a difficult day for everyone. He said it like a man who had rehearsed the line on the drive over. Officer Daniels said, Your name. David Hayes. I'm Ethan's father and Linda's former husband. Do you currently reside at this address? No, but I am responsible for securing the property after Linda's passing. Michael Turner's voice came from behind us before any of us could answer. No, Mr. Hayes, you are not. We all turned. Michael had arrived in a dark sedan, silver hair damp from the rain briefcase in hand, face set with the exhausted seriousness of a man who had spent too many years watching families tear themselves apart over paper and power. David's expression changed. Not much, but enough. Michael, he said. I wondered when Carol would drag you into this. Michael walked toward Officer Daniels and handed her a business card. Michael Turner, attorney for the late Linda Hayes. I also prepared several of her estate documents. Officer Daniels took the card. Thank you. We're trying to determine access to the residence. Michael opened his briefcase. Then let's begin with this. Linda Hayes revoked any prior financial or property authority granted to David Hayes 6 weeks ago. He has no right to change the locks on this property without authorization from the estate or trustee. David gave a soft laugh. That assumes those documents are valid. Michael looked at him. They were valid when you received notice of them. The rain seemed to grow louder. Brenda shifted under her umbrella. Officer Daniels looked from Michael to David. Mr. Hayes, did you change or authorize changing the lock? David's jaw flexed. I arranged for the home to be secured. My son is grieving and not thinking clearly. Carol removed him from his mother's funeral and has been feeding him paranoid ideas. Ethan took a step forward. Stop saying that. I touched his arm. Not to silence him, but to steady him. David turned toward him with the wounded face of a father betrayed. Ethan, I am trying to protect you. No, Ethan said. You're trying to get into Mom's things before we do. Brenda gasped. How dare you speak to your father that way? Ethan's eyes snapped to her. And how dare you sit in my mother's kitchen the night before she collapsed and call it one of her spells? Brenda went pale. Officer Daniels caught that. So did Michael. David quickly stepped in. Officer, you see what I mean? He's distraught. Brenda brought Linda tea and comfort. This is exactly the kind of twisting Carol encourages. I didn't twist anything I said. Linda wrote it down. David's eyes flashed toward the folder in my hands. Again. Always the folder. Officer Daniels held up one hand. Everyone slow down. She turned to Ethan. You live here. Yes, he said. This is my home. Do you have belongings inside? Yes. Were you informed the locks would be changed? No. She looked at David. Mr. Hayes changing locks on a residence where your minor son lives without giving him access creates a problem. David's voice remained smooth. I was planning to give him access once things calmed down. After you searched the house, Ethan asked. David's face darkened. Enough. Michael stepped forward. Officer, my client Linda Hayes believed important legal documents remained in this house. Ethan has a right to retrieve personal property and documents belonging to his mother's estate. I'm requesting a standby while he enters with his aunt. Officer Daniels looked at the new deadbolt. Who has the key? David reached into his pocket slowly and held one up. Ethan stared at it with disgust. That's Mom's door. David did not look at him. Officer Daniels said, Open it. David hesitated. Only for a second. But everyone saw. Then he walked up the steps and unlocked the new deadbolt. Ethan used his old key on the lower lock. The door opened with a soft inward creak. The smell of Linda's house came out first. Vanilla. Old wood. Lavender detergent. Something faintly medicinal beneath it. Ethan closed his eyes. For a moment he was not a witness or an heir or a son caught between adults and documents. He was a boy standing in the doorway of the home where his mother would never call his name again. Officer Daniels softened her voice. Ethan, you can take a minute. He shook his head. No, I want to go in. The officer set conditions clearly. Ethan and I would enter. Michael could accompany us as legal counsel. David and Brenda would remain outside with Officer Daniels unless invited or unless an immediate issue arose. David objected, of course. He used words like paternal rights, family privacy, and emotional manipulation. Officer Daniels simply said, Sir, you do not live here, and I'm not turning this into a shouting match inside the residence. For the first time all day, David had to obey someone he could not intimidate. Inside the house was painfully still. Linda's reading glasses lay on the small table near the entry. A half-finished crossword puzzle sat beside them. Her slippers were lined neatly by the hallway bench. On the coat rack hung the green raincoat she wore when she walked to the mailbox. Ethan touched the sleeve of the raincoat as he passed. Then he pulled his hand away quickly as if tenderness might destroy him. Her bedroom, he said. We moved down the hall. The house showed signs of hurried searching if you knew what to see. A drawer in the side table was not fully closed. The linen closet door stood ajar. 2 framed photos on the hallway wall hung slightly crooked. Michael noticed too. Don't touch anything unnecessary, he said. If something appears disturbed, remember it. Linda's bedroom door was half open. Ethan stopped before entering. I could feel the grief roll through him. A bedroom can become a second funeral when the person is gone. The bedspread was still smoothed. A book rested face down on the nightstand. A cardigan hung over a chair. Everything looked as if Linda had only stepped out for a glass of water. Except the closet. The closet doors were open. Boxes had been pulled from shelves. Shoes were scattered. A plastic bin of winter scarves sat tipped on its side. Ethan's voice came out flat. He was here. Michael crouched near the closet, but did not touch the scattered items. Possibly. No, Ethan said. Mom never left things like this. He stepped into the closet carefully and reached to the back corner behind a row of old coats. His hand moved along the wall, then down to a cedar chest tucked beneath hanging dresses. She kept it in here. He opened the cedar chest. Inside were folded quilts, photo albums, and a small wooden music box painted with faded blue flowers. Ethan lifted it like it was sacred. That's it. Michael closed the bedroom door halfway, giving us a little privacy from the hallway. Ethan set the music box on Linda's bed. His hands hovered over the lid. The song that didn't play, I whispered. He opened it. A tiny ballerina stood inside one arm, lifted head tilted in eternal grace. Ethan turned the key at the back. The mechanism clicked, but no music played. He looked up at me. My heart began to pound. Michael leaned closer. May I? Ethan nodded. Michael examined the box without forcing anything. Old music boxes sometimes have hidden compartments, especially if someone modified them. Ethan turned it over gently. The bottom was covered with faded red felt. One corner looked slightly raised. I remembered Linda's locket, a hidden seam. Do you have a pin? I asked. Michael opened his briefcase and handed me a small paperclip. I straightened it and slid it beneath the felt edge. The bottom panel loosened with a small pop. Ethan stopped breathing. Inside was a sealed brown envelope, flat and tightly fitted into the base. On the front in Linda's handwriting were 4 words, for Carol and Ethan. Ethan's face crumpled. Michael took out his phone and photographed the envelope before anyone touched it. Documenting condition, he said softly. Then Ethan lifted the envelope out. It was heavier than it looked. He handed it to me. No, I said. We open it together. We sat on the edge of Linda's bed side by side while rain tapped against the window and David waited outside like a storm that had not passed. Inside the envelope were original signed trust amendments, a notarized statement from Linda, printed photographs of medication bottles, copies of suspicious bank withdrawals, and a USB drive taped to a sheet of paper. On that sheet, Linda had written, "If they say I was confused, show them this." Underneath was a list. Recording 7, Brenda and the T. Recording 9, David demanding the deed. Video file, my statement recorded while fully alert. Ethan covered his face with both hands. Michael's voice was quiet but firm. This changes everything. I looked at Linda's handwriting. No, it did not change everything. It revealed everything. Outside raised voices came from the front porch. David was arguing with Officer Daniels. Brenda's voice cut through the rain, sharp and frightened. They have no right to be in there. Ethan looked toward the bedroom door. For the first time that day, there was something in his eyes besides grief. Resolve. I folded Linda's documents carefully and placed them back inside the envelope. Then I said, "Let's go show them what your mother protected." We did not show David everything on the porch. Michael stopped me before I could step fully into the hallway with the envelope clutched in my hands. He touched my arm gently, not to control me, but to pull me back from the edge of my own anger. "Not all of it," he said quietly. I looked at him. He needs to know Linda won. He needs to know enough to stop interfering. He does not need a preview of every piece of evidence before I secure it. That was why Linda had trusted him. He was not moved by David's performance. He was not swept up in the drama of the moment. He saw the board, the pieces, the next move. Ethan stood beside Linda's bed, still holding the music box. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. "Can we keep it?" he asked. Michael's expression softened. "Yes. The music box is your mother's personal property, but the documents and drive should come with me to be logged, copied, and secured." I nodded. Outside, David's voice rose again. "You cannot legally keep me from my son." Officer Daniels answered, calm but firm, though we could not make out every word. Brenda said something sharp. Then David snapped back at her. That caught my attention. People like David rarely turn their anger on allies in public unless fear was eating through their polish. Michael slid the original documents back into the envelope, photographed the contents, then sealed them in a clear evidence-style document sleeve from his briefcase. "I'll state this plainly," he said to both of us. "These papers are important. The notarized statement may be extremely important, but the USB could be the strongest piece if it contains what Linda described." Ethan looked at the drive. Her video. "Yes." My chest tightened. Linda had left one final statement. Recorded while fully alert. "If they say I was confused, show them this." I thought of all the times David and Brenda had tried to make her seem unstable before she was even buried. They had prepared their lie with such confidence, but Linda had prepared too. "Should we watch it now?" I asked. Michael hesitated. "Part of me wants to, but not here. Not with David outside and an officer trying to keep the peace. I'd rather review it at my office, make proper copies, and preserve the original file." Ethan nodded, though disappointment flashed across his face. He wanted to hear his mother. So did I. But Michael was right. We walked back through the house slowly. Ethan paused at the kitchen doorway. The kitchen was where Linda had lived most of her life, I think. Some women have rooms that become their hearts. Hers was yellow-walled and warm with a little table by the window and copper measuring cups hanging near the stove. A grocery list was still stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. Milk, bread, tea. The word tea made my stomach turn. On the counter beside the sink sat a white mug with a faint brown stain at the bottom. Ethan stared at it. "That's the mug," he whispered. Michael stopped. "What mug? The one Aunt Brenda gave her?" None of us touched it. Michael took another photograph, then another. He looked at me. "Carol asked Officer Daniels to come inside." I stepped to the front door and opened it. The rain had eased to a fine mist, but the air outside felt electric. David stood near the porch steps, his face flushed. Brenda hovered behind him, twisting the handle of her umbrella. Officer Daniels turned toward me. "Is everything all right? There may be something in the kitchen you should see," I said. David immediately stepped forward. "What are you doing now?" Officer Daniels held up a hand. "Sir, stay outside." "This is absurd," he said. "That is my family's home." Ethan appeared behind me. "No," he said. "It's Mom's home, and mine." David's gaze shifted to him. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand more than you wanted me to." Brenda's lips parted as if to speak, but her eyes went past Ethan into the hallway, toward the kitchen. She knew. Officer Daniels stepped inside. I led her to the counter without touching anything. Michael explained calmly that Linda had left written concerns about medication bottles being moved and feeling unusually drowsy after Brenda brought tea. Ethan quietly identified the mug as the one he saw the night before his mother collapsed. Officer Daniels' face became unreadable in the professional way police officers learn. "Do you know if Mrs. Hayes was transported from this house?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said. "The ambulance came the next morning." "Was this mug here then?" "I don't know. I was at the hospital. Dad and Aunt Brenda came back to the house before I did." Michael's eyes met mine. That detail mattered. Officer Daniels did not make promises. She did not accuse anyone. She simply stepped back and spoke into her radio, requesting a supervisor's guidance because possible evidence had been located in a disputed residence related to a recent death. David heard enough from the porch to understand the mood had shifted. His voice came from the doorway. "Evidence? Are you serious?" Officer Daniels turned sharply. "I told you to remain outside." David lifted both hands. "I'm not entering, but I will not stand here while Carol poisons everyone against my sister and me." Against my sister and me, not my son, not Linda, himself and Brenda. Always the center of his own concern. Brenda's face had gone gray. "David," she whispered, "we should call an attorney." Michael stepped into the hall with the sealed envelope tucked under his arm. "That would be wise." David looked at the envelope. "What is that?" Michael said. "Documents belonging to Linda Hayes' estate." David's voice turned hard. "I demand to see them." "You may make that demand through counsel. I was Linda's husband for 30 years. And then you were divorced," Michael said. "That distinction matters." David's control finally cracked. That woman was not capable of making rational decisions at the end. The kitchen went silent. Officer Daniels looked at him. Michael did too. I felt Ethan beside me go very still. David realized too late what he had said and tried to recover. "She was ill," he said. "Emotionally fragile. Everyone knew it." Ethan stepped forward. "No. You needed everyone to think it." David pointed at him. "You have been listening to lies." Ethan's voice shook, but he kept going. "I listened to you threaten her." David froze. Brenda sucked in a breath. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out Linda's old phone. "Mom recorded you." For a moment, even the rain seemed to stop. David's face changed in a way I had never seen before. The mask did not crack this time. It fell. Pure fear moved across his face before anger rushed in to cover it. "That phone is private property," he said. Officer Daniels took one step closer. "Mr. Hayes," but Ethan did not stop. "She recorded you saying the trust was a problem. She recorded you saying problems can be fixed. She recorded Aunt Brenda and the tea too, didn't she?" Brenda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Michael turned to Ethan. "Don't play anything here." Ethan lowered the phone, breathing hard. "I want him to stop calling her crazy." The words were not shouted. That made them hurt more. David looked at his son, and for the first time all day he seemed to understand that Ethan was not simply grieving. He was becoming dangerous to the version of the story David wanted to tell. "Ethan," David said, softening his voice again, "your mother loved you, but she was filling your head with fear." Ethan shook his head. "No, she was warning me about you." Officer Daniels stepped between them, her body angled toward David. "I think we're done with direct conversation for now." Her supervisor arrived 15 minutes later, along with another officer. They did not storm the house like television detectives. Real life moves slower, more carefully. They spoke with Officer Daniels, with Michael, with Ethan. They photographed the kitchen counter and the mug. They took notes about Linda's letter, the recordings, and the documents. They advised that the medical examiner's office and appropriate investigators might need to be contacted depending on the circumstances of Linda's death and the available evidence. No one was arrested on the porch. That disappointed the angry part of me. But the wiser part understood. Justice rarely arrives in one dramatic blow. More often it starts as paperwork, a statement, a photograph, a preserved file, a witness finally believed. David and Brenda were told to leave the property while legal access was being reviewed. David objected again. Brenda did not. She kept her eyes down, one hand pressed against her stomach. Before he left, David looked at me. "This isn't over." I stood in Linda's doorway with Ethan beside me. "No," I said. "It's finally beginning." His eyes moved to Ethan. For a second, I thought he might say something human, something fatherly, something that admitted pain, regret, even fear. But David only said, "You'll regret choosing her." Ethan's face tightened. Then he said, "I chose Mom." David had no answer for that. He got into the Lincoln. Brenda followed, moving like an old woman all at once. As the car pulled away, Ethan stood on the porch and watched until the taillights vanished around the corner. Only then did his shoulders drop. I put my arm around him. Inside the house, the music box sat on the entry table silent and open. The ballerina inside no longer danced. But Linda's truth had begun to move, and none of us could stop it now. Michael took the USB drive to his office that evening, but Ethan and I went with him. Neither of us wanted to be alone. Not after the funeral, not after the house, not after seeing David's face when Ethan mentioned the recordings. The day had stretched so far beyond grief that ordinary things no longer felt safe. A locked door did not feel safe. A ringing phone did not feel safe. Even silence did not feel safe because silence had been where Linda had suffered the longest. Michael's office was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown above a dental practice and a tax preparer. The hallway smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and stale coffee. His receptionist had gone home hours earlier, so he unlocked the door himself and turned on the lights one room at a time. "Conference room," he said gently. Ethan carried the music box against his chest. He had not let it out of his sight since leaving the house. I understood. It was the last ordinary object Linda had turned into protection. Michael placed the sealed document sleeve on the table, then set his briefcase beside it. He moved carefully, almost ceremonially, as if Linda herself had entrusted him with something sacred. "I need both of you to understand something before we play the video," he said. Ethan sat beside me, shoulders hunched. Michael continued. "This may be painful. It may also become part of a legal process. If either of you need to stop, we stop." Ethan shook his head. "I don't want to stop." "You say that now," Michael said kindly. "But grief changes shape when you hear someone's voice." That was true. I had learned it from the note from the recording, from seeing Linda's handwriting where her hand should have been. The dead can return in pieces, and every piece can reopen the wound. Michael inserted the USB into a laptop that was not connected to the internet. He explained what he was doing, partly for legal caution, partly to steady us. He made a copy of the drive onto an encrypted storage device, noted the time, then opened the folder. There were 3 files. A scanned PDF labeled Final Statement, a video file labeled For Carol, Ethan, and Michael, and another folder labeled Evidence. Michael did not open the evidence folder first. He looked at us. "Ready." Ethan took my hand. I nodded. The video began. Linda appeared on screen sitting at our kitchen table. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. She was alive. Thinner than I remembered, yes. Tired, yes. But clearly herself. Her hair was brushed. Her blue cardigan was buttoned. Her glasses rested low on her nose. Behind her, the yellow kitchen wall glowed softly in afternoon light. She looked directly into the camera. "My name is Linda Hayes," she said. "Today is Tuesday, March 12th. I am recording this while fully alert without medication that affects my judgment and of my own free will." Ethan's grip tightened around my hand. Linda swallowed. "If you are watching this, it means I was not able to finish what I started in person. I hope I am wrong. I hope this video is never needed. But if David or Brenda has convinced anyone that I was confused, unstable, or incapable, I want my own voice preserved." Tears blurred my eyes. Michael paused the video. "No," Ethan said immediately. Michael looked at him. "Please," Ethan whispered. "Let her talk." Michael resumed. Linda folded her hands on the table. "For years, I allowed David to make me smaller. That is not a legal statement, maybe, but it is the truth. He controlled money first, then conversations, then friendships, then how I saw myself. By the time I divorced him, most people thought I had escaped. But control does not always end when a marriage does. Sometimes it only changes addresses." I covered my mouth. That was exactly what I had felt, but never had the words to say. Linda continued. "My father helped me protect this house and certain funds for Ethan. David knew about some of it, but not all. Over the last year, and especially over the last 3 months, David has pressured me to sign documents that would allow him access to the house insurance proceeds and trust property. I refused." She looked down for a moment, gathering herself. "When I refused, he began saying I was forgetful. Brenda began repeating it to friends, church members, and neighbors. They used my anxiety as proof that I could not be trusted. But my anxiety came from living under pressure. Fear is not confusion." Ethan started crying silently. Linda's voice grew steadier. "I have documented withdrawals. I did not authorize conversations where David threatened to challenge my capacity and incidents involving medication and drinks brought by Brenda. I cannot prove everything alone. That is why I am leaving records in more than one place." She leaned closer to the camera. "Michael, if you are watching this, I am sorry I did not bring everything to you sooner. I was afraid. Carol, if you are watching this, I am sorry most of all." My heart broke open. Linda's eyes filled on screen. "Carol, you saw the truth before I could bear to face it. I mistook your concern for judgment because David taught me to hear criticism in every warning. I pushed you away because being near you reminded me of the life I had lost. That was not your fault. I loved you every day, even when I did not know how to call you." I bent forward, sobbing so hard I could not see the screen. Ethan put his arm around me. The video kept playing. And Linda said, her voice breaking, "My beautiful boy. I am sorry I asked you to be brave in a way no child should have to be. If you had to take the necklace at my funeral, then I know people looked at you with judgment. Let them. Their judgment cannot touch the truth. You did exactly what I asked. You did not dishonor me. You carried my voice when I could not carry it anymore." Ethan made a sound like the air had been knocked from him. Michael looked down, his eyes wet. Linda wiped her face with a tissue and continued. "If David tries to claim he is protecting Ethan, ask why he changed the locks. Ask why he wanted the necklace. Ask why he needed me declared incapable before Ethan turned 18. Ask why Brenda was in my kitchen the night before I collapsed." The room seemed to go cold. "There are recordings in the phone I gave Ethan. Recording 7 includes Brenda speaking about the tea. Recording 9 includes David demanding I sign a deed transfer. The evidence folder on this drive includes photographs of documents, medication bottles, and statements I prepared for Detective Sarah Brooks." She paused. Then her expression changed. "Not fear this time. Resolve. I do not know what will happen to me. I want to be clear, if I die suddenly, I am not accusing anyone of murder in this video. I do not have proof of that. But I am saying I was afraid. I am saying I was pressured. I am saying my death should not be used as a doorway for David to take what belongs to Ethan." Michael paused the video again, this time for himself. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "This is strong," he said quietly. Ethan stared at the frozen image of his mother. She knew people might not believe her. "Yes," Michael said. So she made herself very hard to dismiss. He pressed play one final time. Linda's voice softened. "My final wishes are simple. Ethan is to be protected. Carol Moore is to serve as trustee and guardian of estate matters until Ethan is legally prepared to manage them. Michael Turner has my permission to release these materials to appropriate authorities if my safety, my estate, or my son's rights are threatened." She looked directly into the camera. "David, if you ever see this, then understand something. You spent years convincing me my voice did not matter. But I learned too late that truth does not have to be loud to survive. Sometimes it only has to be hidden well enough to reach the right hands." Then she smiled. A small, sad smile. "Carol, tell Ethan I was not afraid at the end of loving him. Whatever else happened, loving him was the bravest and easiest thing I ever did." The video ended. No one moved. The laptop screen went black, reflecting the 3 of us sitting in the conference room like survivors after a storm. Ethan bowed his head over the music box and cried in a way he had not cried all day. Full, shaking sobs. Not because he was weak. Because at last he no longer had to hold his mother's secret alone. I held him. Michael sat quietly across from us, giving grief its space. When Ethan could breathe again, Michael opened the evidence folder. There were photographs, scanned letters, audio files, and a document titled Timeline. Linda had built a timeline of the last 3 months of her life. Every visit from David, every visit from Brenda, every document presented to her, every unexplained withdrawal, every medication concern, every phone call she was too afraid to finish. And at the bottom of the timeline, dated 3 days before she died, Linda had written, "If I cannot finish this, Carol will." I stared at that sentence for a long time, not because it frightened me, because it called me. Michael looked at me across the table. "There will be a hearing," he said. "David will challenge this. He may try to discredit Linda, Ethan, and you." I wiped my face. "Let him try." Ethan lifted his head. His eyes were swollen but clear. "I want to be there," he said. Michael nodded. "You may need to be." Ethan looked at the black laptop screen where his mother's face had been. "I'm not scared of him anymore." I squeezed his hand. I was still scared. But courage, I was learning, is not the absence of fear. Sometimes courage is a grieving boy pressing play. Sometimes it is a dead woman telling the truth from a kitchen table. And sometimes it is an old sister finally deciding she will not look away. The hearing took place 9 days after Linda's funeral. 9 days sounds short when you say it plainly, but grief stretches time in strange ways. Those 9 days felt like a season. We spoke to Michael almost daily. We gave statements to Detective Sarah Brooks, the same detective Linda had named in her unfinished letter. Ethan turned over the phone with the recordings, but not before Michael made careful copies and documented where it had come from. The mug from Linda's kitchen was taken into evidence. Her medication records were requested. Her doctor was contacted. No one promised us a dramatic answer. No one said, "This proves everything." That was the hard part. In stories, truth arrives like thunder. In real life, truth arrives in forms, signatures, chain of custody logs, interview notes, and patient timelines. It moves through offices with fluorescent lights. It waits for experts. It gets questioned by people paid to doubt it. But while the investigation into Linda's final days moved slowly, the estate matter moved quickly because David made sure of it. He filed an emergency petition claiming Ethan was being manipulated by me and that Linda had lacked capacity when she changed her trust documents. He asked the court to freeze estate decisions, review guardianship issues, and remove me from any role involving Ethan's property. Michael read the filing aloud in his office with his mouth pressed into a thin line. David's words were exactly what Linda had predicted. Unstable, confused, influenced by a estranged sister, emotionally vulnerable minor, suspicious behavior at funeral. I sat across from Michael, hands folded so tightly my knuckles ached. "He is using the funeral?" I said. "Yes," Michael replied, because that was the most public moment. Ethan sat beside me, staring at the floor. "He's using me." Michael's voice softened. "He is trying to. But your mother anticipated that." The hearing was held in a probate courtroom downtown. It was smaller than I expected. No grand columns, no dramatic rows of spectators, just wood benches, a raised bench for the judge tables for each side, and a quiet clerk arranging files. Still walking in felt like stepping into the center of a storm. David was already there. He wore a charcoal suit and a pale blue tie. Brenda sat behind him dressed in black again, though this time it looked less like mourning and more like armor. Beside them sat their attorney, a silver-haired man with an expensive briefcase and a smile that never reached his eyes. David looked at Ethan when we entered. For 1 second, his face softened into something almost fatherly. Then Ethan looked away. That softness vanished. We sat with Michael at the opposite table. Ethan was on my left. I could feel him trembling, though his face remained still. "Breathe," I whispered. "I am." "No, honey. You're holding your breath." He let it out slowly. The judge entered, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a calm presence. Her name was Judge Patricia Langford. She did not look like someone easily impressed by theater, and for that I silently thanked God. David's attorney spoke first. He stood with polished sympathy. "Your Honor, this is a painful family matter following a sudden death. My client, Mr. Hayes, is deeply concerned for his minor son, Ethan, who has fallen under the influence of his maternal aunt, Mrs. Moore. During the funeral service itself, Ethan was encouraged, or at least permitted, to remove jewelry from his deceased mother's body, after which Mrs. Moore left with him and began producing questionable documents, allegedly created by a woman whose mental and emotional condition had been deteriorating. Every word was smooth. Every word was poison. I felt Ethan stiffen beside me. The attorney continued. "We are asking the court to prevent any further action under these disputed documents until Linda Hayes' capacity can be reviewed and until Mr. Hayes' parental rights are protected." Parental rights. That phrase sounded noble until you knew the man wearing it. Then Michael stood. He did not sound polished. He sounded clear. "Your Honor, Linda Hayes was not a confused woman being manipulated after death. She was a woman who documented in writing and on video her concerns that her former husband would attempt to do exactly what he is doing today. The evidence will show that she revoked Mr. Hayes' financial authority, amended her trust documents, added her sister Carol Moore as successor trustee, and left explicit instructions to protect Ethan Hayes' inheritance from coercive interference." David's jaw tightened. Michael picked up a folder. "We also have original notarized documents recovered from a hidden compartment in a music box at Mrs. Hayes' residence, copies from a safe deposit box, banking records with Mrs. Hayes' handwritten notes, audio recordings of Mr. Hayes pressuring her, and a video statement in which Mrs. Hayes explains her decisions while fully alert." A murmur moved through the few people in the courtroom. David's attorney stood. "Your Honor, we object to inflammatory characterization and any attempt to introduce edited or unauthenticated recordings at this stage." Judge Langford looked over her glasses. "Mr. Whitman, no one has admitted anything yet. Sit down." He sat. I almost breathed. "Almost." The judge turned to Michael. "Mr. Turner, I want to understand the immediate issue. Are you asking this court to recognize Mrs. Moore's authority under the trust today? We are asking the court to deny Mr. Hayes' emergency request to remove or restrict Mrs. Moore based on claims that are directly contradicted by Linda Hayes' own documented statement. We are also asking that Ethan's access to his residence and personal belongings be protected." The judge looked at Ethan. "How old are you?" Ethan swallowed. 17. Your Honor, how long until you turn 18? 4 months. Her gaze softened slightly. "I'm sorry about your mother." His voice broke a little. "Thank you." David leaned toward his attorney and whispered something. The judge noticed. Mr. Hayes, she said you'll have a chance to speak if necessary. David sat back. Then Michael requested permission to play a portion of Linda's video statement, not the whole thing, just enough to establish her clarity and intent. David's attorney objected again, arguing authentication, emotional prejudice, lack of foundation. Judge Langford allowed a brief portion for the limited purpose of assessing the emergency petition. Michael set up the laptop. The courtroom seemed to shrink. Ethan reached for my hand under the table. Then Linda appeared on the screen. Alive, calm, clear. My name is Linda Hayes. Today is Tuesday, March 12th. I am recording this while fully alert without medication that affects my judgment and of my own free will. The room went still. Even David went still. Linda continued from the selected section. If David or Brenda has convinced anyone that I was confused, unstable, or incapable, I want my own voice preserved. Brenda looked down at her lap. David's face turned pale. Michael let the video play through the part where Linda explained the trust, the pressure, the attempts to call her unstable, and her instruction that Carol Moore serve as trustee for Ethan's benefit. Then he paused it. The silence afterward was heavier than any argument. Judge Langford looked at David's attorney. Mr. Whitman. He stood slowly. Your Honor, a video can be rehearsed. It does not eliminate concerns about undue influence. The judge looked at him. Whose undue influence? He hesitated. Mrs. Moore's potentially. Michael immediately responded. Mrs. Moore was not present when the video was recorded, was unaware of the safe deposit box until after the funeral, and had been estranged from Linda for periods of time precisely because of Mr. Hayes' isolating conduct. David stood suddenly. That is a lie. Judge Langford's eyes snapped to him. Mr. Hayes, sit down. But David had lost the thread of his own performance. She was always interfering, he said, pointing at me. Always putting ideas in Linda's head. Linda was anxious. She was fragile. She would believe anything if Carol fed it to her. Michael turned a page in his folder. Interesting, given that your emergency filing claims Mrs. Moore had little contact with Linda and therefore appeared suspiciously only after her death. David froze. There it was. The contradiction. I saw the judge notice. Michael pressed gently but firmly. Which is it? Mr. Hayes? Was Carol Moore so absent that her involvement is suspicious or so present that she influenced Linda's decisions? David's mouth opened. No answer came. Ethan looked up. For the first time since entering the courtroom, he did not look afraid. Judge Langford leaned back. Mr. Hayes, your attorney will speak for you. David sat, but the damage was done. Michael then submitted copies of the notarized trust amendment, the revocation of David's authority, and the safe deposit box access record, showing Linda had added me as authorized deputy before her death. He did not play the recordings yet. He did not mention the mug in detail. He simply told the court that separate concerns had been referred to investigators and that today's question should not be decided by David's unproven claims of Linda's incapacity. Then, unexpectedly, the judge asked Ethan if he wished to speak. David's attorney objected. Judge Langford overruled him. Ethan stood. My hand felt empty without his. He looked small standing there, but only for a moment. Then he squared his shoulders. My mother was not confused, he said. She was scared. There's a difference. The room went silent. He continued, voice shaking but clear. She told me people might say I was acting out because I was grieving. She told me my father might say Aunt Carol manipulated me. But I took the necklace because my mother asked me to. I gave Aunt Carol the note because my mother asked me to. I didn't understand everything then. I do now. He turned, not fully toward David, but enough. My dad keeps saying he wants to protect me. But the only person who made a plan to protect me was my mom. Brenda began to cry quietly behind David. I did not know whether it was shame, fear, or performance. Maybe all three. Judge Langford thanked Ethan and allowed him to sit. Her ruling came 15 minutes later. She denied David's emergency request to remove me or freeze Linda's trust instructions based on his claims of incapacity. She ordered that Ethan be allowed access to his home and belongings with appropriate supervision, that David not alter locks or remove property, and that Linda's trust documents remain under Michael's custody pending further review. She also noted that the allegations raised in Linda's materials were serious and belonged with the proper investigative authorities. It was not the final victory, but it was the first official one. When the judge left the bench, Ethan dropped back into his chair like his legs could no longer hold him. I put my arm around him. Across the aisle, David stood very still. His attorney whispered urgently to him, but David was not listening. He was staring at the blank laptop screen where Linda's face had been. For once, he had no room to control the story. For once, Linda had spoken where everyone could hear. And for once, people believed her. The first thing Ethan did after the hearing was ask to go home. Not my home. Not Michael's office. Linda's house. For a moment, I wanted to say no. I wanted to take him somewhere warm, somewhere safe, somewhere David had never raised his voice and Brenda had never set a mug of tea on the counter. But then I looked at Ethan's face and understood that he was not asking to return to a building. He was asking to reclaim a place. So we went. Michael arranged for a locksmith that afternoon. This time, the new keys were made properly with documentation under the authority recognized by the court. David's deadbolt was removed and placed in a box because Michael said even a lock could become part of a story if someone needed to prove how quickly control had been taken. I stood in the front yard while the locksmith worked, watching Ethan sit on the porch steps with the music box beside him. He looked smaller there. The house looked smaller too, maybe because David's shadow had finally begun to lift. Inside, Officer Daniels had arranged for the mug and a few items from the kitchen to be collected. Detective Sarah Brooks called Michael later that evening to confirm she had opened a formal review into Linda's concerns about coercion, financial pressure, and possible interference with medication. She was careful with her words. She did not accuse David or Brenda of causing Linda's death. She did not promise what the evidence would show, but she did say something I never forgot. Mrs. Hayes did what many victims never get the chance to do, Detective Brooks told me over Michael's speakerphone. She documented the pattern. The pattern. That was the word that changed how I saw everything. David's cruelty had never been one single act. It had been a pattern. A lock changed too soon, a phone call repeated too often, a document pushed across a kitchen table, a sister-in-law whispering that Linda was forgetful, a mug of tea, a withdrawal, a public performance at a funeral, a court filing calling the truth confusion. One thing alone could be explained away. Together, they told the story Linda had been too afraid to speak aloud. Over the next few weeks, the legal pieces moved with slow certainty. David's emergency petition collapsed under the weight of Linda's video and the notarized documents. His attorney advised him to stop contacting Ethan directly except through agreed channels, but David did not obey at first. He sent texts that sounded loving at the beginning and threatening by the end. "You are my son. You are being turned against me. You will understand when you are older. Your mother was not well. Carol is using you. Every message was saved, every voicemail too." At Michael's advice, Ethan did not respond. That was hard for him. I saw it each time his phone lit up. A father's message is still a father's message even when it wounds. Part of Ethan wanted to argue to make David admit what he had done. But people like David do not confess because truth is offered. They confess only when their lies become more expensive than silence. That happened in pieces. First, the bank confirmed several questionable transfers from Linda's accounts connected to paperwork David had presented as tax planning. Then, Michael found a trail of emails showing David had contacted a real estate broker about Linda's house before she died, suggesting the property would soon be available for sale pending family resolution. That phrase made my skin crawl. Pending family resolution. As if Linda were an obstacle waiting to be cleared. Then, Brenda made her mistake. She tried to sell 2 pieces of Linda's jewelry at a pawn and estate resale shop 2 towns over. Not the necklace. That was safely with Michael. But a gold bracelet and a pair of pearl earrings that Ethan recognized from old photographs. The shop owner became suspicious because Brenda could not explain the origin clearly, and because the local police had already circulated a notice about property disputes connected to Linda's estate. When Detective Brooks contacted her, Brenda claimed Linda had gifted the items to her years earlier. Unfortunately for Brenda, Linda had photographed the same jewelry in her evidence folder and labeled it bedroom jewelry case. Still mine as of March 10th. That date mattered. Brenda had taken them after Linda's death. When Detective Brooks interviewed her more formally, Brenda began distancing herself from David. Michael later told us only what he could, but even that was enough. Brenda admitted David had pressured her to help keep Linda calm. She admitted she had repeated concerns about Linda's mental state to neighbors and church members because David told her it would be important later. She denied tampering with medication, but she admitted bringing Linda tea on several occasions and said David had instructed her to make sure Linda rested before she signed anything. Make sure Linda rested. Those words chilled me. The medical side took longer and remained more complicated. Linda had suffered a cardiac event. That was real. Whether stress medication mismanagement or something else contributed was not something anyone could resolve quickly. The investigation continued, but the financial and estate misconduct became clearer by the week. David's real estate debt surfaced next. He had borrowed money through private lenders after 2 failed commercial property deals. He had promised repayment based on expected family asset liquidation. He had not named Linda directly, but the timeline lined up with his pressure campaign against her. By then, the district attorney's office was reviewing potential charges related to financial exploitation, coercion, and fraudulent attempts to control estate property. Brenda faced her own legal trouble over the jewelry and her statements. David, for the first time since I had known him, stopped calling. Silence from him felt strange, not peaceful exactly. More like the quiet after a tornado siren when you still do not know what has been destroyed. Through it all, Ethan stayed with me most nights. We tried living at Linda's house for a few days, but grief lived in every corner. He would open a cabinet and freeze because Linda's favorite mug was there. He would pass the laundry room and stare at a basket of folded towels she would never put away. Once I found him standing in the pantry touching the penciled height marks inside the door. "I was 6 here," he said. His finger moved upward. 9 here. Then higher. 13. He stopped at the last mark. Linda had written beside it, almost taller than me, "Don't get smug." Ethan laughed once, then broke down. After that, we decided he would stay with me during the week and visit Linda's house when he felt ready. Not because he was giving it up, because he was allowed to grieve it slowly. One Saturday, about a month after the funeral, Michael called and asked us to come to his office. He said there was something small from Linda's belongings he wanted us to see. I thought it would be another document, another account, another painful discovery. Instead, he placed the silver necklace on the conference table. The locket had been carefully examined, photographed, and preserved. Now he said it could be returned to Ethan unless the court requested it again. Ethan looked at it for a long time. Then he pushed it toward me. "She wanted you to have it." "No," I said. "She wanted you to use it." "We did." His eyes lifted to mine. "Now I think she'd want you to wear it." My throat tightened. I picked it up gently. The silver was cool against my fingers. Michael cleared his throat. "There's something else." He opened the locket, not the hidden back compartment this time, but the ordinary front. I had assumed it held nothing important because the secret had been behind the lining. But Michael had found a thin inner layer tucked beneath the small old photograph. He used tweezers to slide it out. It was a picture, tiny, faded. 2 girls sitting on porch steps in summer dresses, arms around each other, laughing so hard their eyes were nearly closed. Linda and me. We could not have been more than 12 and 9. I remembered the day instantly. Our father had taken the picture after we spent the morning catching lightning bugs in jars. Linda had spilled lemonade on her dress. I had lost one sandal in the yard. We laughed because our mother said we looked like wild little queens. Linda had kept that picture in her locket all those years. Not David, not the wedding, not some symbol of the Hayes family. Us. I pressed the photograph to my chest and cried without trying to stop. For so long I had believed David had erased me from Linda's heart. I had believed the silence meant I no longer mattered to her. But all those years beneath her blouse, under her cardigan, against her skin, my sister had carried our childhood close. Ethan wiped his eyes. "She loved you," he said. I nodded, unable to speak. Michael turned away politely, giving me the dignity of grief. That night, I placed the tiny photograph in a protective sleeve and wore the locket for the first time. It felt heavier than jewelry. It felt like forgiveness. Not complete forgiveness, not the kind that erases pain or pretends lost years do not matter, but the beginning of something softer, a way to love Linda without only remembering what fear had taken from us. A week later, David was formally ordered to stay away from Linda's house and to stop contacting Ethan outside legal channels. His access to any estate matters was denied. The court confirmed my role managing the trust until Ethan turned 18, with Michael overseeing the transition to protect Ethan's interests. When Michael told us, Ethan did not cheer. He simply closed his eyes. Then he whispered, "Mom did it." I took his hand. "Yes," I said. She did. Linda had not lived to see the ruling. She had not lived to see David finally cornered by the truth. She had not lived to see Brenda's lies unravel. But she had built the road that led us there. A note, a necklace, a key, a music box, a video, a boy brave enough to be misunderstood, and a sister finally brave enough to listen. Ethan moved into my house the following Monday with 2 suitcases, a backpack, and the music box wrapped in one of Linda's old quilts. He insisted he was only staying for a while, and I let him say that. Sometimes people need temporary words for permanent changes because permanent changes feel too heavy to carry all at once. So I told him the guest room was his for as long as he needed it, and I did not mention that I had already cleared half the closet. The first night, he stood in the doorway of the room and looked at the bed, the dresser, the small lamp, and the folded towels I had placed at the foot of the mattress. "It's nice," he said. Such a small sentence. Such a careful one. I knew what he meant was, I don't know how to belong here yet, so I said, "Your mother used to sleep in this room when she visited." His eyes moved to me. "She did." Sometimes. Not often enough. He stepped inside slowly. Did she like it? She said the window faced the quietest part of the street. That made him look toward the curtains. She liked quiet. Yes, I said. But not the kind she was forced to live in. He set the music box on the dresser. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Do you think she knew I'd end up here?" I thought about Linda's note, her video, her safe deposit box, the locket, the timing of the funeral prayer. My sister had planned so many things with such care that it was tempting to believe she had planned this too. But I did not want to turn Linda into a saint or a fortune teller. She had been a frightened woman doing her best with limited time. "I think she hoped you would not be alone," I said. Ethan nodded. That night I heard him crying through the wall. I did not go in right away. Not because I did not care, but because grief deserves privacy before it accepts comfort. I waited 10 minutes, then knocked gently. "Come in," he said, his voice thick. He was sitting on the floor beside the bed holding one of Linda's cardigans. He must have packed it without telling me. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what I don't know." That answer broke my heart because I understood it. Grief apologizes for taking up space. Children of controlling parents apologize for breathing too loudly. Sons who have just lost their mothers apologize because no one taught them they are allowed to collapse. I sat on the floor beside him. "You don't have to be sorry in this house," I said. He wiped his face. "I miss her." "I know, and I'm angry at her too." The confession came out fast, like he was afraid it would be punished. I kept my voice steady. "That's allowed." He looked at me startled. "It is," I said. "You can love someone and be angry that they left you with so much. You can admire her bravery and still wish she had told you less or told you sooner or taken you away from all of it. Love does not cancel anger. Anger does not cancel love." He cried harder then, and this time he leaned into me. I held him the way I wished I had held Linda when she still had time to be saved. The weeks that followed were not beautiful in the way people imagine healing. They were messy, uneven. Some days Ethan went to school and came home quiet but steady. Other days he barely made it through the front door before dropping his backpack and walking straight to his room. I learned his grief had rhythms. Rainy days were hard. Sundays were harder. Any smell of lavender detergent made him leave the room. He could not drink tea. He hated when unknown numbers called. Once I found him standing in my kitchen staring at a stack of mail because one envelope had David's attorney's return address on it. He did not open it. He did not move. He just stood there trapped by paper. So we made rules. No legal mail opened alone. No calls from David answered. No pretending to be okay at dinner. No apologizing for tears. And once a week, no matter how busy or tired we were, we cooked something Linda used to make. The first week was pancakes for dinner. Ethan mixed the batter too thin, and I burned the first two. He laughed when the smoke alarm chirped, and the sound startled both of us. It was the first real laugh I had heard from him since before the funeral. Not a happy laugh exactly, but a living one. Another week we made Linda's lemon pound cake from a recipe card Michael found tucked inside one of her cookbooks. Her handwriting covered the margins. More zest. Don't overmix. Carol likes extra glaze. I stared at that note for a long time. Carol likes extra glaze. Such an ordinary sentence. Such a holy one. Linda had remembered. Even during the years of distance, she had remembered how I liked my cake. Ethan watched me brush glaze over the top, his eyes soft. "She talked about you more than you think," he said. I looked up. "She did." He nodded. "When Dad wasn't around. She'd tell stories. How you once put salt in Grandma's sugar bowl by accident. How you cried at every school play, even the bad ones. How you could never keep a secret if it was a birthday present." I laughed through tears. "That is unfortunately true. She said you were brave." I shook my head. Linda was the brave one. She said brave people don't always know they're brave. They just keep showing up. That stayed with me. Because for years, I had believed I stopped showing up. Maybe in some ways I had. But perhaps Linda had seen something kinder in me than I saw in myself. The legal matters did not vanish quickly. David continued through his attorney for a while, but his position weakened. The investigation into his finances deepened. Brenda eventually accepted a plea arrangement related to the stolen jewelry and false statements, though she still denied any deliberate harm involving Linda's medication. David faced civil penalties and potential criminal charges tied to financial exploitation and coercive documents. Whether every question around Linda's final cardiac event would ever be answered, I did not know. That was painful. Some truths arrive complete, others arrive with missing corners. But we had enough. Enough to protect Ethan. Enough to preserve Linda's wishes. Enough to stop David from taking the house. Enough to prove my sister had not been confused. 4 months later, Ethan turned 18. We spent the morning at Michael's office signing the first set of transition papers. Ethan would not take full control of everything at once. Michael and I both advised him to move slowly. But legally, the future Linda had protected for him was now truly beginning to pass into his hands. Afterward, Ethan asked to visit the cemetery. It was a clear day, bright and cold. Linda's grave sat beneath a young maple tree at the edge of the cemetery. The headstone had been placed 2 weeks earlier. Linda Marie Hayes, beloved mother, sister, and friend. Her truth became our light. Ethan had chosen the final line. We stood there for a long time. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the music box key. Not the brass key from the locket. The tiny winding key from the box itself. "I fixed it," he said. I looked at him. "You did?" He nodded. "There's a repair shop near campus. They got the music working again." He opened the music box, turned the little key, and set it on the grass beside the headstone. For the first time since Linda's death, the song played. Edelweiss, soft, tinny, imperfect, beautiful. The little ballerina turned slowly, her faded dress catching the sunlight. Ethan wiped his eyes. "She said the song didn't play because the truth was hidden," he whispered. "Now it can play." I reached for the locket around my neck. Inside it was the tiny photograph of Linda and me as girls laughing on porch steps before any of us knew what the world could take. I closed my fingers around it and spoke to my sister silently. "You got him here. You got us both here." That fall, Ethan started college at Ohio State. On move-in day, he wore jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and the nervous expression of a young man trying not to look overwhelmed. We carried boxes into his dorm room, made his bed badly, rearranged his desk twice, and argued gently about whether one person needed that many notebooks. Before I left, he walked me to the parking lot. For a moment, we stood beside my car, neither of us ready to say goodbye. Then he hugged me. Not quickly, not politely, like family. "Thank you for listening to her," he said. I held him tightly. "Thank you for handing me the note." He pulled back, smiling sadly. "Mom knew what she was doing." "Yes," I said. "She did." As I drove home, the passenger seat empty beside me, I expected to feel lonely. Instead, I felt something softer. Linda was gone. Nothing would change that. The years we lost would never return. David's cruelty had left marks none of us could erase. But the story did not end at the funeral. It did not end with a stolen necklace, a secret note, or a courtroom. It continued in a repaired music box, in pancakes for dinner, in a young man walking toward his future, in a sister wearing a locket that no longer felt like a secret but a promise. Linda had left us more than evidence. She had left us a way back to one another. And in the end, that was the inheritance David could never steal. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are not strangers, but the ones who know exactly where our hearts are softest. Linda's story reminds us that silence can protect pain for a while, but it can also become a prison. She spent years being doubted, controlled, and slowly separated from the people who loved her. Yet even in fear, she found a way to leave truth behind. Not loudly, not dramatically, but carefully, bravely, and with love. The greatest lesson in this story is that love does not always look like grand speeches. Sometimes love is a note hidden in trembling hands. Sometimes it is a necklace, a key, a music box, or a sister finally choosing to believe what her heart already knew. And sometimes justice begins when one person refuses to look away. Carol could not change the years she lost with Linda, but she could honor the truth Linda left behind. Ethan could not save his mother, but he could carry her voice forward. That is what healing often means, not erasing what happened, but refusing to let pain have the final word. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up for someone who could no longer speak for themselves? Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if emotional family stories like this speak to you, please subscribe and stay with us for the next one.